NLP for Arabic and its dialects. And as I was saying earlier, it's interactive, so stop, ask questions, we'll go through things. I have 180 slides. So, I don't know how realistic it is to go through all of them. We'll try the best. You have the slides. They're printed actually in the back if you want to take a copy with you, hard copy. Or if you want the PDF, just email me and I'll send it to you. I probably should put it on some one location, maybe on my website or something, and just get it directly from there. All right, so as I was saying, this is originally it was conceived as a tutorial with my colleague Diab, who could not be here today. Guna and I were part of this group at Columbia called Columbia Arabic Dialect Modeling Group, which has kind of evolved from being a Columbia-specific group into a multi-university consortium. So currently only Owen Rambo is in Columbia. I'm going to move to George Washington, and I'm moving to New York University, Abu Dhabi, so this is kind of like self-advertising here. It's called Camel Lab. It stands for Computational Approaches for Modeling Language. We're working on Arabic core NLP, dialectal modeling, machine translation, and pedagogy applications. And I'm looking for people, good men and women, so please, talk to me, email me, apply. It's levels, research scientists, postdocs, or even research assistants. So possibilities. Okay, so the tutorial, I'm going to start with a bit of introduction. Talk about then orthography, morphology, syntax, lexical variations, code switching, and machine translations. This is thematically oriented and kind of builds, on top of each part builds on the previous parts. And so starting with Arabic and the forms of Arabic, some of you may have actually seen the talk in the morning. It's partly overlapping with this, but this is going to be probably more. So Arabic is a Semitic language. It's about 300 million speakers. It's one of the 6 languages of the UN, and it has multiple forms that people are easily, typically you find classifications of. So people talk about classical Arabic, so this is mostly historical texts and religious texts. And then we have modern standard Arabic or MSA, so I'll be using that short-term MSA a lot probably throughout the tutorial. And this is the official language of the different countries in the Arab world, and it's the language of the news, media, and formal speeches, etc. And it's the only form of Arabic that has a written standard associated with it. And then there's dialectal Arabic, which is the predominantly vernacular, colloquial form of the language. It's spoken across the Arab world, and so it's primarily spoken and has no written standard as opposed to the standard language. Of course, there's this question about what is a dialect and what's a language, and it's really, at the end of the day, it's all politics from point of view. Things kind of, you may find in some other languages around the world, 2 languages that are so close to each other, but they call each other languages, and they don't recognize a relationship between them, even though they say, oh, etymologically we're related, historically we're related, but we're different. And that's, to some degree, there's some truth to that in the context of Arabic, too. So this is a map of the Arab world where you can see 2 kind of ways of thinking of the Arab world. One is across boundaries of countries, the geopolitical borders of the countries that you're familiar with. And then you get the different regions that have shared phonological, morphological, lexical features that connect them. And so these different spots of color actually are where people are talking in similar ways, much more closer to each other than the areas that are near them. And what's really interesting and surprising, perhaps, when you see this is places like Iraq actually interact with 4 different areas. So, and this is kind of when people say, oh, I thought Iraqis speak like Gulf. Well, that's true, it's not false, but not all Iraqis speak like people in the Gulf. Some Iraqis speak differently from people in the Gulf. Right, and it's just kind of, it's a lot more complex. There's no dialect really that is associated with a country, the exception perhaps of Egypt. You can think predominantly of, because all of Egypt is, So much of Egypt is in Cairo anyway, but even then, you know, there is actually lots of distinction. You know, you can see Said at the bottom, for example, being marked more closely to parts of the Sudan, for instance. And as I said, you know, the official language is modern standard Arabic, and one thing that's also kind of typically surprising for people who work with languages when they come to the context of Arabic is the issue of nativity. And this is also, again, you know, the terminology itself is politically charged to start with. I'm using it here in the sense that this is the language that somebody would be brought up speaking at home, right? So the huge majority, the normal majority of kids in the Arab world do not grow up in homes where standard Arabic, like the one is used to read the news on Al Jazeera, is used. You know, they go and they learn this when they go first grade or kindergarten. They may start learning it, but that's really not the language that they speak at home, and they have to learn this as a second language. Yes.
What's the different shades of gray?
The different shades of gray. You mean in the
countries you speak of? There's dark gray, middle
here?
Layer.
That's a good question. I don't know the answer. I didn't create the map, but I don't know what to tell you. I suspect part of it is empty. I mean, what's that? It's all, part of it is probably not populated to start with, but that's a good question.
Why does it have different shades?
I don't know the answer to it. Yeah, I would have to go back and look at the map to see if there is actually a reason for this shade.
Why you then consider dialects inside the same city? For example, in Alexandria, in Egypt, we have 4 dialects. The people at the west side, the people in the middle, the people at the right side, and this is completely different because I'm from the phonetics department in Alexandria, and we studied the variation in phonetics, phonology, morphology, syntax across different regions inside the same city.
Inside of Alexandria?
Inside of Alexandria. And this can be considered as different dialects. So do you consider something like this in your plan to deal with Arabic dialects or not?
Yes, that's my plan. I'm not talking about plans for particular research that I'm doing, but yes, I mean, I suspect you will find this even in the areas definitely in agreement with you, let's say in the Levant, where here it appears as one single color, let's say within the Palestinian area. I know there are 4 different variations in the phonology of like the Qaf consonant, for example, so that's true. I think it's an issue of the degree of difference. Phonologists see a lot of variation in the world, more than everybody else in linguistics. But this is kind of, then you get with the shading of when is it an accent as opposed to a dialect. And again, it goes back to politics, I think, to some degree, and the perception of difference. So, I mean, I'm not going to continue with the answer more than that. No, I think everybody can hear okay? I mean, if you, okay. But if you can control the temperature.
Yeah, of course, I felt it, I don't.
Thank you.
But for recording, maybe you need the mic.
So, in terms of the...
You may need the mic for the recording. I don't know. The recording, is it recorded?
It is.
No, I mean, it's someone...
yeah, I can. Oh, for them. Oh, that's a good question. Okay. But I can leave it there. People would have to come up and maybe I'll repeat the question next time, if there is any. But this kind of continues actually with what Samah was asking about how do you draw, even saying Egyptian Arabic in itself is slightly contradictory with what we're saying. But these are the terms that people use when they discuss dialectal groupings. And you can go and do further sub-classification of it as, for your needs.
And corpus compilation as well.
What's that?
And corpus compilation of different dialects there.
That may be the case too, yes. You can also explore things like this. And then obviously the last part also is consistent with some of the points that were made, that even within the same city, there are certain connotations with, I know like there were the studies, linguistic studies, for example, on the dialect within Baghdad, in Iraq, where depending on the religion of the person speaking, there are actually phonological markers that distinguish them. So it's kind of consistent. But I don't believe, frankly, it could be wrong, but I don't believe the claim of syntactic differences within the same city or even morphological differences. I find that kind of a bit far-fetched. But phonology I can see to some degree. And then, you know, this kind of fact about the language, the standard not being a native language when it's actually used in particular situations, creates an interesting environment where there's kind of an interesting dynamic between these two forms of language that Arabs use, and it's, you know, commonly referred to as diagnosis, you know, or at least theology, and it will be in Arabic, where you would have these two forms being used in different contexts. So the standard one is used when you are in formal situations, as opposed to the dialectal form, that is kind of more the private, poetically sometimes referred to as the language of the mind versus the language of the heart, as these differences between the standard and the dialect. The general perception among among Arabs is that the dialect is just a deteriorated form of the classical language. And actually, even this modern standard classical Arabic, I mean, a lot of people just collapse the two and they just call it Fusha. They don't actually distinguish between Fusha Turat and Fusha al-Asr. It's more academics make that distinction of the classical and the modern standard. And obviously, this is true. Dialects exist on a continuum. It's true for any language, not necessarily specific to Arabic in this case. So I mean, this is just kind of repeating what I just said about the use of the standard and the dialect in the contexts that are formal and informal. Your typical MSA would be formal, your typical dialect is informal, and then there's a variety that's been called the formal spoken Arabic, which is kind of a slightly higher form of the dialect where people may actually pepper their speech with words or terms that would come from standard Arabic. And of course, there's kind of the diagonal kind of construct that appears, which is informal and standard Arabic. And that's just kind of a weird variety, basically. You would find it a lot among Arabic language learners who are, so L2, meaning they learned it as a second language. So poor American students who want to learn about the Arab world, they go study standard Arabic, and they come and they want to talk to people on the street, and everybody thinks they sound like aliens because nobody speaks this way. I mean, they appreciate the effort, but they're usually thinking, well, something is kind of off. And then the other form of it is like what's been called telenovela Arabic. So these are like the Mexican soap operas that have been dubbed into standard Arabic, producing a very interesting variety as a result that nobody really speaks, but you know, people. It's an interesting choice to do it this way. Just a kind of another example to give you just a taste of the kind of degree of differences, because I talked a little bit about phonology, perhaps, and morphology, but here you see more going on. So if you take this sentence, simple sentence, commanded not by any table, you'll find that syntactically, the general word order is about the same, with the exception of the verb positioning, which may actually shift a little bit. We actually have statistics on this, which I'll share in this section on syntax. But the morphology is where I see a lot of differences happening, and particularly, for example, the part that's marked in red. So in standard Arabic, you have a particle that has, effectively, it's the carrier of negation and tense together, that says that this is a negation in the past of a verb, whereas in most other dialects, this doesn't exist. It's this particular construction, and instead it's replaced with the past tense of a verb with a circumfix negation that just surrounds the verb structure. So you end up with a much more complex morphology as a result. And just kind of adding to this, just again, this is just still high-level introduction to concepts about, for people who are not aware of this or who think they are aware, just to look at what other researchers have looked at. Even in the same city, this is a famous Egyptian linguist, Badawi, who looked at the different levels of, or different varieties of Egyptian Arabic used in Cairo, and he generally here correlates it with education and interest. So he talks about traditional versus modern, educated colloquial, literate colloquial, and illiterate colloquial. And what's interesting about this observation that there are actually three things that are going on, three phenomena. One of them is a classical effect, which you see more prominent with traditional and less so with the illiterate. And then a colloquial effect, which you see prominent with the illiterate and less so in the traditional context. But then a third one, which was he called foreign. So this is foreign in the sense of borrowings from French or English coming into the language. And those are actually most prominent in the middle level, not on the extreme. So traditional Arabic would not be using borrowing from French, neither would illiterate peasants, let's say, but the educated people will be mixing more their language. So why should we borrow this? And I mean, a few years ago, it was a conference, I think, in Cairo and Nizar. Some people made this statement and said, why should we bother with doing this? There's only standard Arabic, that's the only language that we should worry about. These dialects, they don't deserve any form of recognition. This is before the social media explosion and seeing people writing now unconstrained, lots and lots of materials in the dialect. And even at that time, we kind of knew that this is going to happen. Dialects are here to stay, and you kind of have to deal with it. Regardless of what you think of whether people should speak one way or the other, they do. They do speak in this form of the language, and they do write in it, and there's no standard for writing, and they will write in all kind of crazy ways, and you can choose to go and work on a different area. As I'm talking to you as NLP people, you can choose to say, I'm not interested in this, I'm just going to work on translation of, books that are written in standard Arabic, or just analysis of standard Arabic, and that's completely fine and wonderful, no problem. But there's a lot of interesting stuff going on, and there's, with dialectal language that actually is working. And their presence just forces us to look at them and deal with them. There's also kind of another argument for those who are MSA enthusiasts, and that is that, in fact, because of the prominent use of the dialect today, more and more people see it, it will be, and we know that it has been sneaking into the use of standard Arabic itself. So even the standard is actually slightly being affected and changed over time, and to be able to handle it, to build systems that are robust, you want to be able you want to be aware of these kind of think of like if you say I'm interested in doing speech recognition on Al Jazeera interviews, you cannot control that speakers will code switch or jump between the standard and the dialect, and it seems kind of silly to say, oh, I only do speech recognition on the standard parts, I'm not interested in the dialect part, it's not going to fly. Someone else will come and snag the contract for better speech recognition from you. Okay. Now, it's also in general, this tutorial was not specifically about the dialect, it's actually more about, as it says in the title, processing of Arabic and its dialect. And some of these issues are shared for both the standard and dialectal Arabic. And kind of put this slide just to kind of highlight, when people work in English, and as actually most NLP people, when they're taught NLP, they're taught with English typically. But it's really a lot harder to work in Arabic, for the following reasons, and then the rest of the tutorial will be going through exactly why that is. One is orthographic ambiguity. A word means a lot. There's a lot more shades to it in Arabic than it is in English. I'll explain what that means. I'm not meaning just meaning. It's actually, it's a very technical term in this case. So the different interpretations of it. Orthographic inconsistency, that the same word can be written more than one way. Rich inflections. Complexity in the morphosyntax, word order freedom, and of course the dialect and variation that come in and just it's a multiplier of complexity across everything. Okay. Does anybody have any questions so far? I think they turn the AC on, probably feel a bit more comfortable. Okay. So let's start with orthography. Yes.
Can you compare it with other languages?
Yes.
Like,
how does any of this compare to other languages? I suspect to some degree it's very similar, with some reservations. So all human languages have dialects. Obviously, this is not something unique in the Arab world. I think though, the situation where the standard language is a complete, a language that is not a native language of anybody is kind of in the minority. So you take France or Spain, Spanish or French, you will find there is an agreed upon standard, de facto standard that's been set historically because of the power structure that made the dialect of Paris the proper way to speak French, but then these other variations that exist in the south or in the colonies are just different ways of pronouncing things, or there may be extensions, right? But there is a reference point. And I think in the Arab world, the dialectal problem is more complicated because the only reference point that people seem to agree on is so far off and is so far removed in distance that it makes it a lot more complicated. So I would say that would be one of the things that makes this more complex. I'm sure there's probably some situation of some languages that are more like Arabic in that sense, but I'm not aware of that.
And then let's put it this way, we usually see English as the exception.
You see English as the exception in what sense?
Because it's easier to process, but basically every other language is more difficult.
Oh, I see. Oh, you're talking about it not from the like sociolinguistic point of view. You're talking about these issues. I mean, but yeah, I mean, so in that, I mean, perhaps my answer is specifically the dialectal variation in that case, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, English is not particularly. I mean, so English has understandable orthography, but its orthography is completely crazy, right? So you have to build big lexicons to know how to pronounce certain vowel combinations in English. So that's actually harder in English. Spanish would be an easier case. Arabic is not an easier case because of the dropped vowels. Chinese is a really hard case because there's no phonetic information. So I don't know. I mean, I don't think English is necessarily the easiest in this case. If you're thinking about mapping from phonology to phonemes for speech synthesis, I would expect another language like Spanish would be easier. But I'm sure there's also, I mean, nothing is completely easy, obviously. Because I'm not saying Spanish is easy and everything else is not. And morphology, that is also true, that lots of languages around the world have complex morphology, but there's also degrees of complexity, right? So, and I do talk about this later in the tutorial, where, you know, you may have languages, like Chinese has almost zero morphology, so that's hence it's easiest to handle from a morphological point of view. English has a little bit, European Romance languages have more, Latin and Standard Arabic have a lot more, right? And you would handle them. So yeah, so that, I mean, if I pick another language, most of them may actually be on the side of more versus less in English, but there'll probably be some cases where that's not exactly true also. But this is not about multilingual processing. So I think I'm going to stop here. None of this should be taken as saying Arabic is so special and so complex and so hard to deal with. It's just pointing out observations about, you know, if you are interested in working in Arabic NLP, these are things that you have to be prepared to do. Okay, so Arabic is written typically in the Arabic script. Little fact about the Arabic script that would help you also contextualize and understand some challenges. It's an alphabet written right to left. That's completely irrelevant for our purposes, actually. Just in case somebody actually thinks this, writing right to left makes anything harder for Arabic processing in the computer. Today, it does not. I should actually say that if you use text that was produced, you know, 25, 30 years ago, that was in some digital form, you may actually have problems. There was a period where people were trying things where they actually organized the text backwards to make it more directly printable on the screen using the technology that supports left to right. So if you think you have a corpus, I know this is the case actually in some Persian newspapers, where the older documents, if you kind of download them from the web, you have to do a lot of preparation and reverse things, but this is kind of completely irrelevant today. Unicode and the bidirectional processing supports this. Although I should say some tools like the one I'm using here kind of sucks at it. It took a lot of time to get the Arabic display with the English to work beautifully. But you know, it's a lot better than it used to be for sure. The letters have different forms, which we'll talk about in a second, and there's no concept of capitalization. So a task like named entity recognition in English, where you use, oh, if it's capital, it's most likely, or if it's the probability of it being capitalized against a corpus, is a really good feature that's not available to you in Arabic. There's no concept of capitalization in Arabic. And then the dialects, which are optional. On the graph on the side there is intended to highlight, kind of point out the issues, just like with the Latin script, which has been used to write many different languages. The Arabic script is also used to write many languages. The area in the green is like the equivalent of the ASCII. You know, it's used in American English. It's like the core set that is used to write standard Arabic. And then there is a very large number of extensions, which are also now all hand-built using Unicode for writing other languages like Persian and Kurdish and Pashto and others. Sindhi, I'm told, doubles the number of characters that are used. Actually, more characters than there are characters in the original script using Arabic. It's just a lot more forms. And the alphabet itself has these basic letter forms and letter marks, which are combined. These are obligatory combinations. It's not optional. And they create specific connotations with phonology. Typically, this is standard Arabic. So the nodding position tells you if it's a bell or etc. Most are distinctive. This little thing, if you take one of the little things you have to remember is the hamza, or the glottal stop. It's a pain in the neck. A lot of processing in Arabic automatically has to handle it. And it's actually one of those things that are also kind of weird, even for native speakers sometimes. You make spelling mistakes, and it's a one sound that has many different realizations that are contextual. And then, of course, there's this issue of the use of diacritics. And there's a small number of diacritics. These are the little symbols that appear over and under. They're generally used for short vowels and for a particular morpheme called the lunation morpheme, which is written as also using the same diacritic set. But also, interestingly, the last symbol on the right there is actually a gemination marker. It tells that this consonant is actually two consonants. So if you're interested in doing a mapping from the written form into something that can be used for, let's say, speech synthesis, you would want to be aware that sometimes, a B is actually two B's in that case. And they do combine together. Okay, so you put everything together. Probably I should go the other direction, but it doesn't matter. Internally, in terms of the, when you look at a string of text and you look at all the different symbols in the string, you're looking at the letter followed by the diacritic. They get equal length, basically. But then when they're displayed, the display just organizes it on the screen in the proper way. So this is also kind of hidden from us, from our, we don't have to worry about it as much, except that you have to be aware that, let's say, if you are doing text matching and you have not prepared your data to be free of diacritics, you can't expect, or you have modified the process to be aware of the possible presence of diacritics, you will have mismatches unnecessarily. Also things like special ligatures, of which there are many in different fonts, but there's only one that is obligatory, which is the LA that appears in this. So it has to be written in a particular way. This kind of is also one of those things that are now dealt with in Unicode. But if you look at older encodings, actually even like the earlier United Nations document, which were, I think, set in WordPerfect. Anybody remembers WordPerfect? So those actually had internally a special code for this ligature, which meant that you cannot actually match against it. You have to know to map things properly before you will map it to its components. Again, this is all kind of irrelevant today, thankfully. And then here I just want to show you what the text would look like if it was end-diacritized, which is what you would almost always see. The thing on the top is the most common form. The thing on the bottom you almost never see. Actually, Arabs would just think this is kind of irritatingly busy. And just, this is, you expect this if you're reading, let's say, the Quran, and that's kind of about it. No other text kind of is acceptable to put all of the diacritics on. I suppose like for cases when we're teaching Arabic, this may be helpful, but most of the time it's not. We did some statistics, so I believe in GigaWord, which is a news text collection, like 1.5% of the words in the text have one diacritic maybe on them. So sometimes you just write one of the diacritics, you don't have to write them all. And I think it was like a third of the time, when there's a diacritic, it's on the wrong letter. So the diacritic is just put somewhere on the word, really effectively becoming like a semantic marker that says, hint, read me differently, don't go with the first reading. I'll show a couple of examples. Another thing, if you're kind of doing basic processing of Arabic, you should be aware of is something called tatwil or kashida, which is a symbol that is the elongation symbol. It's basically this stuff here. So these are actually internally multiple characters that are added, that are used for text justification purposes, and nothing more. Then, of course, we'll talk about when you're dealing with Arabic script and the use of numbers, you find actually even across the Arab world multiple different systems that are used. So there is the Western Arabic, which is what in the West people call Arabic numerals, and it's actually primarily used in places like North Africa, or Western West Africa. But then you also find another form which you would see actually in Doha you would see the first two both being used in different places, of course. But then the last one is more used in Iran and Pakistan, and it's mostly the same except for a couple of characters in the middle. So, and in Unicode, these are represented completely separately, actually, as two separate sets of numbers. It's kind of confusing, so one of the things that we usually do in our processing is just collapse them into the same thing, just not to worry about these differences. Obviously, sometimes this may backfire. If you're interested in generating Arabic, you have to kind of be aware of what is your target audience and how to generate it in the proper form. Now, in terms of phonology and spelling, and here we're just talking standard Arabic, if you take anything from this, it's just that most of the time, the relationship between how Arabic is written and is pronounced is 1-to-1. So this is kind of nice, except for these trouble areas that I have at the ends here. This is just using basic alphabetic order that's used for sorting. So the hemzas are problems, and also some of the glide vowels, so W that can be used as a vowel or a consonant, etc. So it's mostly phonemic, except that, as I said, the short vowels are not written and typically appear as diacritics. And as I said, before, you would find some diacritic from time to time, typically to help the reader parse the text properly. A very common example of this is a marker that tells you that this verb at the beginning of a sentence is a passive voice, not an active voice. So kind of like reader beware, you should start preparing to interpret what comes after as kind of the underlying object, not the subject, if it's a passive reading, or to make a distinction that are subtle in semantics that come from the short vowels, which otherwise are not written. I'm going to skip over the last one because it's actually not that interesting here, just to kind of keep aware of time. There's a couple of morphophonemic characters, so these are symbols that actually have multiple pronunciations that have this kind of a particular connotation of meaning. One is the kamaruta, or the feminine marker, although, as you'll find later on, it's not always a feminine marker. It's just a particular morpheme that appears at the end of certain classes of words. And then there's something called an elif maksura. I'm pointing these out because these particular phenomena appear in the literature. Actually, when you read a paper on processing Arabic, you will see references to these particular phenomena and things that have been done to handle them. So the elif maksura is one of these things that will pop up again because there's inconsistent spelling of it that happens. And then the hemza variants, which I mentioned earlier, which have multiple different spellings but one pronunciation. Okay, so Arabic spelling can be ambiguous, as I said, partly because of the diacritics, mostly I said before because of the diacritics, but how ambiguous? And classically you find things like this, where they say, and this is actually an example that I saw in a book on Hebrew, actually, it was not on Arabic, but it applies completely exactly the same, because Hebrew uses also diacritics to write its short vowels. And they say, so text would look like this, can you read this? Anybody? Yeah, this is what an Arabic text looks like with no vowels, if you drop all the vowels. But this is really not a true equivalent. I mean, it's not a true model of the complexity of Arabic writing system. It's not really that bad. Partly because the long vowels are written always, so it's not, all the vowels are not written. Initial vowels are always represented with a special character. So effectively, initial vowels are kind of written. And final vowels are often written because they typically have, particular character at the end, or a kamaruta marker, for example. So this is more like what Arabic would have looked like, or English would look like if it was written using the Arabic orthography system, vis-a-vis specifically the writing of vowels. And this is, to me, is completely readable. And in fact, this is something that looks like text messaging that people would do. So I usually joke in these lectures that Arabs have been text messaging for the last 1,400 years. It became text message, and now everybody's catching up, really. There are some things that should be said. Often the dropping of the vowels is considered a deficiency, a problem. And from the point of view of somebody learning Arabic, it is a challenge, obviously, because you have to learn a lot more. Information is not there, and you have to kind of basically remember a lot of facts about how to pronounce certain words. However, it has a great advantage in the context of how Arabic is used, specifically in the context of dialects. As you would imagine, short vowels are one of those things that vary a lot between different dialects, and that information is hidden. So to say that yaktubu and yuktub and yiktib are three different forms of the word he writes in two different dialects in a standard, you know, if you're writing this completely explicitly, they would look so foreign and different from each other. Arabic script kind of normalizes this aspect, and it kind of, so it has an effect on actually bringing these forms closer to each other. And as NLP people, this is actually a lucky coincidence. It's actually good in some ways. Or at least we can make use of it to our advantage. Another thing that's kind of related to this issue is how proper names are transliterated. This is kind of a this is kind of preparation for a slide on transliteration, which I will use across the talks. So transliteration literally is transliteration is mapping from one letter form to another, typically relating, let's say, Latin script to Arabic script, or other way around. And often, this is seen as kind of a hard problem, typically in the complex proper name. That's like the most common use for it in NLP area. So there's always the famous example of the Gaddafi problem that you have one way of spelling Gaddafi in Arabic, but you have a very large number of ways that you can spell it. So this is problematic if you're doing information retrieval. If you're searching for Gaddafi, how do you spell the word in English to find documents about the man? Of course, this is not a problem of Arabic versus Latin script in that particular direction. It goes also the other way, and I kind of came to call it the Gaddafi-Schwarzenegger problem. So Schwarzenegger has, in principle, one correct spelling, although there are lots of spelling errors. But in Arabic, there are multiple ways that you can write it, depending on how you imagine it should be pronounced. Right? So this is kind of multiplicity in the transliteration is problematic, and it's kind of typical of work on transliteration. That said, we can also talk about a one-to-one transliteration that is non-lossy. And this is a question that people ask about all the time. There's something called the Buckwalter transliteration. This is a de facto standard that's used in the field for a lot of resources. So the Linguistic Data Consortium, their official morphological analyzer based on Buckwalter uses this transliteration. Their tree banks typically come in Unicode and also with this transliteration. And I've gotten questions in the past from people saying, why are you writing Arabic in Roman script? Would you be losing information? We are not going to lose anything. This is just a one-to-one mapping, and there's no lossiness whatsoever. So don't be worried. And it was intended to be a very simple way of mapping things, and there are different varieties of it. I highlight in the slides the areas that are kind of problematic. A lot of them are kind of direct. So T is T, and B is B, but in other cases, the Tamaguda is T. You have to kind of remember a few cases to know what's going on. I've been working in this area for like 12 years now at least, and this was a lot more prominent and important in the earlier days. I mean, I'm seeing now more and more people actually avoiding to deal with Buckwalter altogether and just do things in Unicode. But you may still see things that exist in Buckwalter, and it would be just good to be aware of them. I found one advantage of using Buckwalter when we were doing debugging, so I'm talking technology, because it would allow me to see exactly what's going on in the string or debug my code. Whereas sometimes if you look at the screen, you don't really know 100% what's going on because the support for Arabic display, unfortunately, it's still not great. Like of terminals, for example, that you use in that. So there are other ideas that people come up with to deal with this, but simplicity here is still attractive to some degree. Again, don't think it's a promotion of anything, just as this exists, people use it, don't be shocked, and don't complain. Why not is not nice?
Is that what you said the alternative was?
The alternative of
To Buckwalter?
I mean, Unicode. You just use Unicode directly. I mean, and Buckwalter itself comes in multiple varieties, by the way. There are like XML sensitive, and there's ones, I mean, But Walter had, when it was designed to work within ASCII, so it's actually designed to work in 7 bits, so you do not have any complex form, like there's no characters with accents on or anything like this. So it was just kind of the least amount of information that you can, or the simplest form that you can use. But this is some of the characters, like the ampersand, for example, will make some machine somewhere unhappy because it's a special letter or a special symbol. So we always have to kind of be aware of doing this conversions, unfortunately. But, just like, something that people who work in this deal with, basically. And with Unicode, although it is nicer, there are tools that still do not have full support of Unicode. So you may have sometimes to go and do something like this, or convert your own. One thing I would actually say to be aware of, if you get multiple dictionaries, let's say, because this actually happened to me, where we had 2 different dictionaries that had slightly different encoding transliterations or encoding schemas, and like from alif, ba, ta, tha, from the beginning, they look the same, and then they become different. Don't just look at the top of the file. Actually do careful checking to see that this is actually the same. I know these are silly things, but it can take hours to discover that there's a bug, somewhere. Okay, so now I'll talk a little bit about the dialectal phonological variations. So we talked about standard Arabic, and then there's a lot of differences that happen within dialectal usage. So these 4 characters are commonly the biggest offenders, so to speak, the ones that have lots of variety. Number 1 is the qaf, which has 5 or even 6 different pronunciations in different regions. Sometimes within subdialects also, the and je. And what happens is, in some cases, the mapping kind of maps a sound from a character into another character in the standard Arabic set. So those are kind of easy in a way because, you pronounce the th, sa, I have a sa already, I know how to write the sa. But if you pronounce the je, g, I don't know how to make a distinction between je and g in the Arabic script. And different areas in the Arab world actually made different decisions. So you end up with this kind of funny situation where you have the gene with the 3 dots that actually is read in 3 different ways, depending on where you are. Actually, it's ch, g, or je, depending on your basic preference for it or where you're from. And then there are also little interesting things like the V with the 3 dots below and the V with the 3 dots above. And you actually see these, like if you travel to places like Dhabi, for example, you actually see some of the V with the 3 dots under, but that's completely odd for people on the eastern side of the Arab world. And then, of course, there is the idea of dialect should perhaps be, or people propose that dialect could be written in not Arabic script. This was kind of a big argument in the 40s and 50s, kind of pre-computing age, where the number 1 argument, which now we can laugh about, was that Arabic printing is very costly because you have to have for every letter all the different positions, the initial, medial, and final, and standalone, and the cost of making a printer, printing machine would be really expensive. This is completely gone, of course, today. But people at the time argued that, if you want to get people to read and write and, just do what the Turks did and drop Arabic and go towards some Latin script that's adapted. And there were proposals. One of the famous one was the one by Lebanese poet called Said Aqil, which I put kind of his list over there on the side. Now, today, of course, we have a similar problem, which is that a lot of Arabs are not comfortable using Arabic keyboard, or Arabic keyboard is not supported on phones. So people want to do text messaging, so they end up coming up with an alternative that is ad hoc, and that's what people call, Arabici or Arabish or Franco-Arab. These are all different names for the same thing. And here are some examples of what these symbols that look like. And this is kind of an interesting problem that did not exist, 20, 30 years ago, that now it's just kind of exploded and we have to deal with it. Which is the issue of how do you map from this particular variety to an Arabic standard script. But on top of it all, even when you talk about, let's say, Egyptian Arabic written in Arabici, there are lots of different ways, and you say, map it to Arabic script. I still don't know how to map it to Arabic script because there is no standard orthography for, let's say, Egyptian, not picking, just pointing Egyptian as an example of how to write some things in Arabic script. So an example would be a word like Habash, which could be written in many different ways. You can write it etymologically or you can write it phonologically. And you could probably search online and find all of these existing, right? So there's another kind of twist to the issue, is that I don't know what to map it into, right? There's no standard. The Arabic Academy does not recognize any of this. And even when people, this is examples of text I'm going to show, even when people actually go out of their way and say, we're going to actually write the dialect, you know, in Arabic script and come up with an orthography for it. So this is actually a translation of the first chapter of Genesis in the Bible, in Arabic, of course, in Lebanese Arabic specifically. And I find this really funny because, I mean, thinking out you're handling, you know, texts you consider holy, and then you make spelling inconsistency, 3 of them, in the same, you know, chapter, the same few verses. So the word sama and sama, daw and daw, masa and masa is spelled in 2 different ways. One with a preference for a dialectal reading, and the other one for a spelling that kind of comes from the etymology from Standard Arabic. And it's really completely unmotivated the way I see it. So it's kind of interesting that people are not even aware of this level of detail of attention that you may need. Of course, when they are writing in Arabic, as we said earlier, there are lots of inconsistencies. Just a small example here. This is also kind of like in social media, you add the layer of social media messiness on top of everything. So here, for example, a particular pronoun ek is pronounced is written as 1AK, multi-AK, and then just K, kind of inspired by Arabic writing where you don't write the short vowels. In a way, normalizing this text, beside mapping it to Arabic script, you know, you still have a problem of normalizing the variations that exist there. So what did we do? We developed at Columbia this idea called a conventional orthography of dialect in Arabic. You can think of it as a standard of some sort, but, you know, standards usually are associated with, you know, very large bodies agreeing and official support, etc. And we don't have that. So this is just us calling it a convention, because at the end of the day, a standard is a convention, but not every convention is a standard, of course. So this is a convention, and it was just something that we decided, you know, we're going to write things in this particular way, so that our annotators, when they are correcting text or when they are creating lexicons or adding entries in a dictionary, etc., they all know how things should be written. We just have a common agreement on how to spell things. And when we decided this convention, which we called CODA, we tried to keep in mind having to do it for multiple dialects. And so we initially built it for Egyptian Arabic. There's a version for Tunisian, and we're currently working on a version on Levantine. There was a paper presented on it at the Arabic NLP workshop. And a lot of the decisions are really shared across, you know, we want them to be shared across all of these different dialects. Most importantly, it's written in Arabic scripts, right? So it's actually kind of also connected to the culture and the history of the region, and also kind of in support of the education, you know, that's, you know, in the Arab world itself. Sorry about the T there kind of falling on the side. So this is an example of a sentence in Egyptian. The top is the coda, and then the bottom are just different ways of writing the same thing in Arabic and in Arabic script. And one thing I like to point out is that the choice that we made in coda looks like any other choice. It's really nothing particularly special or kind of outstanding, or like we're not using additional characters in the Arabic script. So just a simple set of choices that we made. In some cases, there are cases where they seem like, oh, yeah, that's interesting, this is not my top one choice, but I accept it. If I see it, I will accept it. But we wanted to get things to be consistent also. That we didn't want to have rules that are so complex that nobody would would be able to handle it, and then it just would backfire. And some of the examples of things, of course, you know, when we're talking about coda, the thing at the top, obviously, you want to avoid spelling errors. There are, so when you're talking about codifying some text, a lot of the things at the top are consistent with what you do in Standard Arabic anyway. But one of the things at the bottom that are kind of more specific to coda are things like spelling using the root cognate for some sounds. So although the word qalb, you know, may be pronounced as elb or gelb or kelb, you would write it with a qaf. just a convention. And it would be kind of like making the situation as bad as English spelling, which has a lot of historical effects, becomes like a historical spelling. This word historically was spelled and it has changed, so now we're just going to write that word in the historical context. We don't go all the way and say, let's write everything in Standard Arabic and change the way all the words are written. Just specific phenomena that are constrained, that have a lot of prominence. The second set from the bottom are dialectal clitic. So these are prepositions and particles that do not exist in Standard Arabic. So we don't really know, do you write that, Ahl Bayt, for example, do you write the tash or not a tash? Do you delete the alif in alif lam, as we do with lil bayt? We don't have an alif. What do you do? We made a choice. This is a choice. This is how you're going to write it, and then that's just the end of that. Things also like the negation is always spelled as a separate map. So this is actually a simplification that benefits us in other ways too, and it's also consistent, with how people perceive Arabic. Finally, there are cases where there is no historical connection. These are words that came borrowing from other languages or that were local, older forms of older languages that existed in parts of the Arab world before Islam spread through them. So like Syriac or Berber, for example, words that are being borrowed in the dialects of the Levant or the dialects of North Africa. And there you cannot say, I'm going to write it as it's written in Standard Arabic. It's not Standard Arabic. There's no equivalent. But there are lots of ways of writing it. We pick one. And everybody will have an opinion about the choice. And I just kind of say we try to kind of keep these decisions as simple as possible and consistent in spirit as possible. And when we went from Egyptian to other dialects, if we had a choice, I actually pushed toward making the same choice as Egyptian if it's acceptable, just to minimize, kind of an expansion of forms unnecessarily. It's not saying don't read this and I'm telling somebody to write Levantine as an Egyptian. Just for some words, it didn't really matter. And you see both forms written, write the one that is consistent with the choice that we made in another neighboring dialect. This actually is consistent with a lot of principles in a field called grammatology, which is the study of development of writing systems. When people work with languages that have no writing systems whatsoever, there are certain principles that they try to follow. And as you can imagine, just kind of an aside, how you decide to write a word affects a lot of things about the person. Like when you teach a group of people who do not have a writing system how to read and write, but you give them a system that makes them alien relative to their neighbors, you're actually alienating them. Whereas if you teach them the same basic script, so they can, when they go to their neighboring country, they can actually read, even if they don't understand, you're actually allowing kind of communication to happen and be possible. And this is some of the things that we looked at here. So there's a system called Codify, which was developed. I'm going to skip over some of these details here, and the links at the end for papers. Yes?
Sorry, before we leave that slide, so you said you went for simpler choices basically. But in the previous slide one before this, you find like Ili without Hamza below it, and then Igaba with the Hamza below the alif.
Yes.
So why here, you believe this is simpler, and here you believe this is simpler? For me, I would say without Hamza should be simpler everywhere, right?
You could say that. When the system for Egyptian was developed, we tried, and this kind of question you're talking about has to do with the phenomenon of Hamza al-Wasat, Hamza al-Qata, right?
It's not the right, so it has to be with Hamza.
Right. No, but see, even the argument that you used is an argument based on another language. You used an argument based on Standard Arabic spelling rules, not an argument based on how things are pronounced in the dialect that you're looking at. What we did in the coda that was done was to actually take the principal rule that says you put it in a context and you see whether the Hamza disappears or not, right? And that is the basis for whether you write it or you don't write it, right? So if you take a word like asl, for example, right? If you have, when you put it in the middle of a context, you say wa aslu, right? You don't say waslu. I know some people say, I could also say waslu, and then you create another ambiguity. And this was, if you accept the fact that you can say one and not the other, then the rule applies simply as it applies in Standard Arabic, but to a different set of facts. What we found in practice, and you hit on it, is that this is really, what's hard to agree on is not the rules, it's the facts. And in Standard Arabic, the facts are derived from the rules. So you cannot really, we don't have recordings from 1,000 years ago of how Arabs spoke. We have descriptions of how people are expected to write and speak that are preserved in the rules, which then people apply. Right? So there's a situation there we actually don't know the facts, we only know the rules, and from the rules we project the facts. In the dialects, we have the facts and we have a set of rules, but we don't agree on the facts. And when we went into Levantine, and this was from the presentation I did in the Palestinian Arabic paper at the beginning of the conference, there was a lot of disagreement on the facts. And this actually led us to actually push toward the solution we suggested, that the hamza at the beginning of word stems will be dropped. It will not be considered part of necessary, it will be considered as a decoration that can be put or deleted. There was evidence from lexicography that it's actually almost irrelevant in the lexicon to make a distinction between a hamza wasl and qata. There's no distinction except for 2 words in the whole Arabic language that actually has this distinction. And it just seems unnecessary. So that's kind of the direction that we're going into. But in the slides, kind of in defense of the slides, they are consistent against a particular set of facts, apply to a set of rules applied to a set of facts that are in general, we were in general agreement on. And illi was perceived in the facts to be different from the case of each other, and that's why they were written different. But this issue is getting kind of demoted in status. Good question. And then, still in the section of orthography, there is this issue of the transliteration. So we have a system called Arab, and there are papers, actually there's one paper in this conference on the system. This takes a writing in Roman script, and then you can map it directly to Arabic script. I'll show you actually a quick demo here of, so this is an online demo of the system, and so I mean I can type things if you want, or you can test it during the break if you want. But it says كيمو haha مبروك, good. أشوفك بعد الفطار ISA. ISA stands for Inshallah. It's a shortened form of God willing. And what we actually do in the mapping is we do map all the forms, but then for word good, we recognize that it's a foreign word and we map it as in English. We don't actually write it as Jim, Waw, Dan, Jud in that case. And then the shortened forms, like the equivalent of LOL and OMG in Arabic, there's a whole set of them used in Arabizi, are also extended. So ISA becomes Inshallah spelled out. Going back to, another thing, this is the end of the orthography section, something called the Qatar Arabic Language Bank. For those who attended the workshop at the beginning of the conference, the Arabic NLP workshop, we had a shared task on doing spelling correction. So now this is not dialect exactly, this is all standard Arabic, but if you look at this example, I mean, you can see the number of errors that are written by someone who's intending to write in standard Arabic, actually, but somehow they missed a lot of classes in school, must be, or something, I don't know. Some of it are really egregious. So this language bank has about 2 million words, or the plan is to have about 2 million words. We currently have finished about 75–80% of it. And as I said, there was a shared task and 9 different groups of people competing. So this data is publicly available. So if this is something you're interested in or applying interesting machine learning techniques to how to improve the quality of spelling correction in Arabic, this would be a great test data set to use. Okay, so we are an hour in. Oh no, we are an hour in. We started at 2, it's 3 o'clock. We get a break 3:30, I believe, or 3:40. Do you have any questions so far? If you want to stand up and move around, I'm completely fine with it. So feel free. Okay. So next we're going to talk about morphology. So morphology refers to the form of a word, what goes into the construction of a word in any language, not necessarily Arabic. We can talk about morphology using terms that refer to its form. So you can think of a word is made up of a stem with a prefix and a suffix, or that even the stem is made out of a root and a pattern and they combine together. Or you can talk about it in terms of the function, or what is the purpose of putting these pieces, or what is the functionality in terms of meaning, let's say, of something that is part of a word. So there we can talk about the derivational aspect, that, where words are related to other words, like kitab and katib, for example, write and writer. And in Arabic, this happens to be mostly templatically driven. Mostly, not always. And inflection, which are different variations that are not typically in the core part of speech, but like variation, let's say, in tense or gender, number, person, that usually keep the core meaning of the word, but just kind of vary inflection. Typically, the things that you see happening in agreement, let's say. And in Arabic, this happens to be mostly concatenative and less so templatic. Yeah.
What do you mean with templatic?
Very good question. So templatic morphology, you're paying attention, that's good. So templatic morphology is a feature of Semitic languages typically, where the analysis says that you actually have two types of morphemes that do not exist concatenatively next to each other, but actually kind of one interdigitates with the other. That's the term that's used. One is kind of fills the gap in the other. An example, particularly, is something like the root katab or KTB. So it's a trilateral root. There are three basic consonants there, and then the pattern would be a pattern that you can fill with the root. So, this would be like saying, take KTB and plug the K, the T, and the B, and then you get a particular reading. So that particular pattern, the one that says ma'u, as opposed to the patterns, generally have very specific associated meanings associated with them. So one is that it's the passive participle, the other one is the active participle. That's usually the good, bright, happy story where things make sense. Reality is a bit more complicated, of course, but this is kind of the base for the whole idea for how templatic morphology works. So from this you get katib and maktub, and if you know this, and I tell you another form is like shadul and majhul, kasr and maksur, you know that it's actually following the same kind of semantics that's coming from the pattern, but with a different root, right? And generally the meaning is kind of derived from all these pieces, and that creates kind of a morphological family around the root, or the root family. So in Arabic, the KTB root, which has to do with writing of some sort, gives you the word for book, the verb to write, written, letter, library, writer, and office. But not the other things that you may have to do with writing, like the word for pen or pencil, are not actually from this root, they're from other ones. Right? So this is kind of where the idiosyncrasy comes in. Another example of this is what's called root polysemy, where you have one root, but now there are many different meanings or shades of meanings of the root. So the LHM root has to do with meat. So you get butcher and meat, and it has to do with battle, like a massacre, epic, etc. And also soldering, when you solder metal to metal. And you'd have to be quite imaginative to find a way of connecting all of the three together. Like, well, when people go to war, all the soldiers, actually that's kind of run into each other, and then you have chopped meat afterwards. I mean, I don't know, maybe not. So this is kind of pushing the limits of what happens with the meaning of the root. I think there's definitely value for it. There's definitely, well, I should say definitely, there's very likely kind of a cognitive model of it that happens in our brains. We relate some things, but there's also a lot of things that are probably quite ad hoc, and you just remember that. But again, that's just my guess in this case. Now, give you more examples of what happens with inflectional morphology. So the first one I talked about the roots and the patterns. We're talking about how things are derived mostly. And now when you're talking about the inflections, these are the subtle variations that have to do with tense, let's say, or gender, number, person. And in Arabic, in addition to these differences, in the subtle features of gender, number, person, aspect, etc., you also get another factor, which is sets of clitics. So clitics are these particles that are attached to the word, like the conjunction and some prepositions that are written attached to the word, and that usually creates other ambiguity. So you see here, for example, a word وَسَنَقُولُهَا, and we will say it. you can decompose it into 5 different pieces. And each one of them, so this would be translating into 5 different words in English, but it's written as a single word in Arabic. And this is not so interesting, just showing the different, the inflections actually vary in multiple dimensions, like gender, number, person, etc. But also there are different types of prefixing, suffixing, or both. This slide probably can spend 3 hours just discussing. It's about a set of concepts which you find in the literature, like lexeme, lemma, features, and then things like root and stem. Often people confuse some of these terms, and they're all really technical terms that have specific meaning associated with them. I'm not really sure I'll be able to go through all of them, but if you hear the term later on and you have questions, please ask. The definitions I provided here with examples, and if you have any questions at any point, just raise your hand and I'll just answer that particular question. Just to kind of keep, go ahead.
I'm afraid there is no difference between lexeme and lemma.
Yeah.
Because
so,
one is English and the other one is Latin or something.
No, that's not true. So a lexeme is defined as the set of all of the different forms in the inflectional space, whereas the lemma is the representative of the set. So you could, by saying they're the same, you're making an equivalent between a set which has multiple members and a representative of the set that has those multiple members. The issue is that the set of the different members, it has all the different facts. I mean, these are let's say katib, katiba, katibun, katibat, and katibat. All of these are members of the lexeme set. But then the lemma is one representative, and the lemma is ad hoc to some degree. I mean, what we pick as the base to represent the form is just ad hoc. Most Arabic dictionaries agree on the form of the lemma being, masculine and singular, perfective, meaning past tense if it's a verb. Otherwise, you can allow it to be feminine and singular if there is no masculine. But even then, you find in some dictionaries, for example, nouns are written with an alif lam at the beginning. So some dictionaries actually say the entry is al-katib, not katib. And they actually have a reason for this, because sometimes in the indefinite form you have like qadin, drops the ya, whereas al-qadi, you have to keep the ya. And so in some cases, the decision for how to pick the lemma has other reasons to it, but it is definitely different from lexeme. It's not exactly the same as lexeme. Now I'll agree with you. Some people use the terms interchangeably. Granted.
Well, lemmas in general, or lexemes, don't have any relation with word forms. If we have to speak about word forms, then this is word forms. Word forms coming from the same lexeme. If you say al-katib, katib, katiban, kutab, all of them are one lexeme, represent only one lexeme.
Yes, and when you, in a dictionary, you want to represent that lexeme, what do you do? How do you represent the lexeme that is a set of things?
It depends on the dictionary, because all Arabic dictionaries, or all the Arabic dictionaries, are root-based rather than lexeme-based.
We have to disagree on this.
Yeah.
So not everybody. I mean, there are dictionaries that are actually.
Just recently, but not the original Arabic books or dictionaries. But in any case, if we have
impossible. You cannot list all the different forms.
No, not all different forms.
So as a result, you have to be making a set of choices about abstractions. I mean, maybe there are disagreements in the convention that's used to represent the lexeme set. But those are superficial disagreements and can be mapped from one to the other.
Then katib is a lexeme or a lemma?
A lexeme is a set of things, not a thing. So, and the katib is the lemma that represent the lexeme in which katib exists, together with kutab and katibun and katibat. Anyway, I mean, I think this is one of those. I actually don't want to say there is one right way and one wrong way.
Yeah.
In my definition, I'm kind of insisting on this particular definition, which we are using in a lot of work that's being done. I completely respect disagreements on this. And in fact, if I want to, let's say, link dictionaries that you're building to dictionaries that we are building, we just have to understand how to normalize the terminology and link them to each other. If we all agree, I mean, as people working in the field, that our interest is to model the same language and we're not making up facts about the language, it doesn't really matter. We just have to find ways of relating it. So I'm actually not at all saying that your view is wrong. I'm just saying that if we ever connect your work with my work or our work, we have to be very careful about the points of disagreement with terminology. So, yeah.
Maybe it's kind of a different question. The middle set of definitions, is that standard also for English or no?
For English, you cannot really talk about. I mean, the concept of lexeme, the way we are using it, is used for many different languages. So I guess you can say that. But the concept of a root, I would say no, it's not. I mean, the concept of, root sometimes for English and some other European languages is kind of used interchangeably with stem. But the distinction that's being made here is because of the completic morphology. So that would be like the most obvious kind of things that stand out.
What about the last one, segmentation?
Oh gosh, yes, that's all. Segmentation and tokenization are, and notice actually my definition is very shallow even, segmentation refers to a particular way of the action of chopping up a word. And what you decide is an affix or not an affix is to some degree up to you in a way. But I mean, in Arabic, there's a set that's been agreed on generally by people working on Arabic. The difference between segmentation and tokenization is that in segmentation, you don't do morpheme recovery. So for example, if you take a word like limaktaba, the alif in the definite article L is not actually written. So a simple segmentation would not show it. Whereas when you're doing tokenization, you would show it. People disagree on this. This I would say is probably more the terminology that's I think is actually optimal and used in the work that we develop. But as you'll see later on the tutorial, even in tokenization, you cannot just say, give me a tokenized word, or give me the tokenized form of this word. You have to say in what schema you want this to be tokenized. There are many different ways of tokenizing. Whether some clitics are kept inside or not is actually, it's a convention that you use or for a particular purpose. And we actually done a series of papers that look at just the value of different tokenization schemes compared against each other, and even combinations of systems using different tokenization schemes. Right? But you want to avoid the situation of saying, I developed my model, let's say for machine translation, using tokenization A, and I have text in tokenization B, and I expect things to work. Obviously, then you have to make sure that things are completely consistent with each other. If you expect to get like meaningful behavior. Here is the set of inflectional features, and with the Arabic terms for the Arabic speakers that kind of related to, as much as possible, to traditional Arabic discussions of the topic. Often people make the claim that, oh, this is a foreign way of doing things, these concepts are made up. And, some things, there are subtle distinctions that are being made that I actually find to be very helpful, even in discussing Arabic, that Arabic does not actually handle your work traditionally. But I think there's a way of combining all of these and benefiting from them. I don't think again, if your model can handle all the facts, bless you, right? It's just, you can call it whatever you want to call it. But you want to be able to model the facts. And when a model is deficient, then there's a problem, regardless if it's been used for a long time by a lot of people. I'm going to skip over these because it's just the tables are there. Now, in terms of power of speech, this kind of goes also to the same kind of question, actually, another degree of complexity. When you talk about what is a part of speech in Arabic, and so a very when kids learn the basic 3 parts of speech in Arabic, it's the usukta al-harf, right? It's like the first thing that you kind of learn. Is the most general way of looking at it, but then there's lots of different ways of actually thinking about what a part of speech is, and in practice. You will find different systems that are developed in different groups at different times. They came up with different sets. Many are relatable. Some even change over time, like the LDC actually changed their sets, halfway through developing the tree bank and then re-annotated the tree bank to be consistent. But if you use different versions, you cannot compare them with each other. And all of this is driven by the same thing, which is creating consistent annotation, creating the best modeling of facts of the language that you can do. And so some of the, let's say in the work that I do, we talk about a core computational part-of-speech tag set that's about 34 tags, and we compare it to, let's say, Buck-Walters tag set, which is really made up of about 170 morphemes that are about 500 or so in the tree banks that are tokenized, but if they are untokenized, they can go up to 22,000 forms, right? And that's just a very large number of forms. People also looked at, I mean, there's a series of them. If you look at my book, Introduction to Arabic NLP, there's a detailed discussion of all these different tag sets and kind of why they were designed for what purpose, and pointers to the papers that use them. And if you use a system like the system that we use, Medamira, which uses the standard Arabic morphological analyzer, you get kind of feature set that looks like this. Let's say here's the diagonalization, the lemma, the Buck-Walter tag, the English gloss that goes with it, and the different feature value pairs that describe all the different features that can allow you to generate the word exactly. Let's skip over this one. An interesting thing before we get to the really interesting part about morphology, something called the form function discrepancy. So what I said earlier, that there are kind of, morphemes have a specific meaning associated with them, and I said, no, except when they don't. These are kind of examples of these cases where, and this actually creates often a problem, where you have to understand what the tag set is actually modeling exactly. So Buck-Walters tag set, which was used in the tree bank, we can talk about as being a form-based tag set, where there actually, if there is a feminine, what we call the tamabuta, appears, he says this is a feminine singular ending. And often people interpret this to be a kind of a failure on that tag set. It's actually Samet made a point during the workshop at the beginning, where if you take a word, let's say the word khalifa, caliph, which has a tamabuta ending, the Buck-Walters would say, oh, this is a noun with a feminine singular ending. It's really saying this is a noun with a tamabuta ending. Right? It's not really saying it's feminine. So it has a tamabuta. The tamabuta most of the time happens to be feminine singular, but it's not feminine singular, obviously. Khalifa is masculine, and the agreement facts in the language tells us that it's masculine. It agrees with masculine verbs. It doesn't agree with feminine forms of verbs. So we make this distinction between something that you can actually talk about these as two different layers of information. That the same word can have, by form it looks like feminine, but in fact it is masculine. And there are really interesting combinations of cases like Sahara, for example, which is wizards, that looks like a feminine singular, but in fact it's masculine and plural. So it's the exact opposite of this set of features.
Could you say that this is a difference between grammatical gender and natural gender?
No, to some degree you can say that. With the problem that, in the case of Sahara, that's true. But the problem is natural gender is undefined for lots of things. So why would an exams be feminine? I don't know. So there is kind of, they're really different classes of nominals that behave in different ways. And it's not kind of an open infinite set, which is a set of behaviors.
No, I was going to say that another place where that occurs that is misleading is in the distinction between singular and collective plural. Like we also have fa.
Yes.
Right,
yeah.
and that's irregular.
That's right. So there are cases, where it's a collective plural. So semantically, people think of tufah, which is apples, as being plural because it's referring to having apples or liking apples. But in fact, it behaves like a singular, although semantically it is actually, it's an uncountable plural. That's actually its problem. So there are tests for all of these things. My student Sarah Korjani have done a lot of work on this issue, and even we annotated the Pan-Arabic tree bank with the second layer of features, and we've done work on predicting it, from the form-based predict the functional features. Okay, so we've talked about all these issues in the morphology, and I'm going to talk about the issue of morphological ambiguity. And morphological ambiguity simply is that if you're given a word, there are lots of different meanings of this word, with all the possible meaning of the word meaning. Yeah. No, because I just want to kind of mix kind of a core lexical meaning from kind of inflectional difference, which is also a meaning difference, but it's kind of considered a separate class. I'm just going to do this. So in terms of morphological richness, to distinguish it from morphological ambiguity, if you look at the ratio of tokens in Arabic to English as opposed to the types in Arabic to English, you find a very interesting phenomenon. So the number of tokens in Arabic compared to the number of tokens in English is smaller. It's 80% of this. So for the same text, let's say the same parallel data, you look at the number of tokens in both of these, Arabic tends to actually be smaller, mostly because all of these definite articles and prepositions and other clitics that are attached to the word, so they count as part of the word. But when you look at the number of forms, the types, the unique types, you find that Arabic has twice as many as English, even though the total number of tokens is actually smaller. And this is because of the richness, so words are packed with information, and that's why you get a smaller number of words, but more forms of those words. And in terms of ambiguity, if you look at every word, what are the number of analyses associated with it? And for standard Arabic, using the standard Arabic morphological analyzer, find about 12 different analyses per word. Every word has 12 different readings, almost 3 different lemmas. So lemmas would be a core meaning, and the 12 are with all of the inflections. You'll say this is ridiculous, how is that possible? Think case endings, right? So case, there is 3 cases, nominative, accusative, and genitive, and then they can be indefinite or definite. That's already 6 forms, right, for most words. So it's easy to get to 12 after that, if you believe this. Now, some of the ambiguity can be referred to as derivational ambiguity. So this is a word, let's say the word qaida, that actually has many different meanings. And in principle, we read 1 different lexical entries in a dictionary for it. So there's the qaida that is the name of the organization, al-Qaeda, and there's the qaida that's a military base, but qaida happens to also be a rule, as in a mathematical rule. It's qaida riyadiyya or qaida nahwiyya, right? So, and these are very different meanings. Come from the same root, right? But actually the same root, same pattern, same set of inflections, in fact, but the core meaning still is different. Other things that we see is inflectional ambiguity. Most kind of interesting one, famously, is the form of taf'al or taktub, which is always ambiguous. This is a form that means you, masculine, singular, does, or she, feminine, singular, does. And those are pronounced exactly the same, written the same, no distinction whatsoever. So actually resolving these cases is very hard because you don't really know, you have to look at the context. Also, segmentation-related ambiguity, where a word may have a clitic attached to it, that clitic could be interpreted as part of the root. So WJD could be wajada, he found, or wajaddu, or and grandfather. Completely unrelated. This is the kind of thing that would contribute toward the 2.7 different lemmas that are ambiguous. And on top of all of this, you also get the fact that the short vowels and optional diacritics, which include the doubling, are optional, so you don't know that they're there. It adds to the ambiguity, and on top of that, you get spelling, substandard or suboptimal spelling. Most notoriously, the hamza dropping, the tamabuta being dotted or undotted, the alif maksura that has the dots is a ya or not. And this is so common. I mean, I think, in fact, when we did the qalb shared task, it was like 60-something% or so of the errors came just from these guys. Right? Just people just do not do it in a consistent way. I mean, it's interesting because it also means that it's not really, doesn't carry a lot of signal that is necessary for comprehension. You can have it, you can take it or leave it. It doesn't really matter that much. But we try to follow a particular standard of writing that editors would use when they publish as the book. So I want to distinguish here also between 2 interesting concepts that often people collapse with each other. People say, I have a morphological analyzer that tells you exactly what the reading is in context. And to me, it's a disambiguator or a part-of-speech tagger, perhaps, in that case, not just an analyzer. So in the terminology that we use, at least in the work that we developed at Columbia, we try to stick the distinction between analysis and disambiguation. So analysis would be, if you get this word, which is the word B-Y-N, pronouncing it, you can have many different analyses out of context. It can be any of these things. However, in context, it has one reading. And the most common reading that Arabs would have for that word is that it's a preposition between or among. And in this context, that would fit. Obviously, this is not then after as opposed to then after. And the task of identifying, the right reading, is kind of similar to doing part of speech tagging on the full tag, but we're calling it morphological disambiguation. So to just contextualize this in terms of how hard things are, when you talk about morphological disambiguation in English, and people don't talk about morphological disambiguation, they don't use that term, they call it part of speech tagging, basically. We would be talking about finding a morphological tag that fully describes the morphology of word in context. So an example would be saying that you have go, went, going, gone, go, goes, and these have different tags associated with them. You can still talk about that, there is a basic word form. A llama here is go, and the part of speech tag tells you exactly what the form of it is. But these are features, basically. So it's kind of, but what happens is when you go to Arabic, the number of features is a lot larger, and it's kind of, instead of talking about 48 tags, you're talking about 22,000 tags to do the analysis or disambiguation. One of the tools that we developed called Meta handles this. I'm going to describe how we do this, and I'll show you a quick demo, and then we take the break. So in Meta, you get a word. Let's say this is word 0 in a particular context. We run it through a system that's a morphological analyzer that is rule-based, human-created, that given a particular word, it gives you a vector that says, for this word, the llama is X, the gender feature is A, the number is this, the person is that, etc. So you think of the vector as the position is the feature and the color is the value, just kind of symbolically. Independently, we also have a set of classifiers, and these are little black boxes. They could be any kind of machine learning that you want to do. We actually use SVMs. We train them on the Pan-Arabic tree bank. Okay? And what we do, we look at the window around the word, and we try to predict, this word in this context will have this core part of speech, this gender, this number, this case. So instead of saying I'm going to do a classifier that will classify into 22,000 different things, I'm breaking it into 14 different classifiers, each one of which is going to classify between, let's say, 4 and 34 things, right? So it's just simplifying the problem. And then we combine both sides, and use a ranker to see the distance. It's possible that the classifier will come up with something that is just completely ridiculous, doesn't exist. Sometimes we find, like, we would say, this word has the following case and the following aspect. So aspect is usually associated with verbs, not nouns. Case is only nouns. But since these were done independently, which is kind of a weakness of the model, perhaps you could say that something should be combined together, it just would not exist. And that's where we rely on the analyzer to help us actually restrict these combinations. So you get the ranking. The ranking itself, the ranker itself is tuned against a different data set to kind of weigh different features differently in the match. And then we pick something. So in terms of its evaluation, kind of use color here to just say, how proud we are of the behavior, perhaps. So a baseline that we're using here is the baseline column refers to just using the most common analysis that exists in the Pan-Arabic tree bank, right? So if I see a word, I say, I've seen this word katib before, and the most common time it was katibu, I'm gonna say it's katibu. And I'm not going to say it's kataba, and I'm not going to say it's katibi or katuba. I'm going to pick one reading. And that overall, so the rows are different metrics, which is also kind of something you have to be aware of. How do you evaluate? The one at the top is the harshest metric that says you have to get everything perfectly. Let's say the input is the one that appears on the right, wakatib. I want you to get all of these different dimensions perfectly correctly, right? The POS and feature says, I only care about the basic part of speech tag and the features, or I only want the diacritics to be perfect, or the diacritics without the last diacritic, which is the case marker, I want it to be perfect. So they're different, or just the segmentation. So you notice, the segmentation seems easier in the baseline, because you can take this word and think it's wakatib as an and writer, or wakataba, and he corresponded, and say the wa should be split. you're wrong on figuring out that it's a verb versus a noun, but you got the segmentation correctly, and then you get the points for that. So the system meta is the result that we have is the one in the middle, and there, we show we get to about 99% in terms of the segmentation, 96% of predicting the lemma. But then when you put everything together, it's still only like in the 80s, mid-80s. And then mostly because of the diacritics at the end of the word. Not the diacritics in the middle of the word happen to be similar to the lemma, which makes sense. But then the ones at the end of the word are syntactic, and so you have to have a much better model of the sentence to know that this is the subject, let's say, as opposed to the object.
So you have exactly the same results for lemmas and base part of speech. I know that in Sama, there are some parts of speech that have multiple lemmas. So this is basically indicating that there's very little ambiguity in terms of what actually appears in the corpus that you're evaluating.
That may be the case. I mean, I don't know, actually. This is an interesting idea, which should be easily checked, right? I mean, but I haven't thought about it. So I don't really, I need to think about it a little bit more to kind of the particular hypothesis you're suggesting. It may be, actually. I mean, one thing that kind of makes sense to agree with you is that the data is mostly news next. So that's possibly a good kind of, it's consistent with your intuition that you're not going to get a lot of different kind of lemma variation. It's possible. But I don't know. I cannot confirm.
Yes, so the bottom ones are used in the other ones, right? So segmentation is used for base.
No. Oh, very excellent question. This system, the way it works, it doesn't have multiple steps. We don't actually segment, and then after that, put a speech tag, and then it's all done together. It's one step. We don't actually have multiple steps. There was a system called Emira that Diab developed, which has multiple steps. I mean, it does first the segmentation, then it does the part speech tagging over the segments. And the main distinction between Meta and Emira is that we do not do that. It's all done, the title of the paper was like morphological tokenization, part speech, blah, 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 in one fell swoop. The idea is to do it all together, without any separation. And the way this is done is that you get a word like wakatib, you get all the different possible analyses, all 12 of them, right? And then you pick one of them. And the moment you pick one of the 12, you already get everything. If you pick this analysis, let's say, that happens to be the correct one, you already get the segmentation. So there's no reason to do segmentation separately from the rest. And let me see. Right. I mean, and this actually relates to the point, and I'm going to go to the demo and then we'll break. When we actually do the disambiguation, we're doing it at the level of the analysis completely. And then how do you kind of segment things later? And I mentioned earlier that we have different schemes. It's kind of up to you. I mean, so we don't actually have multiple systems that are working for different segmentations that then we build different ways of disambiguating on top of them. We just do it all together, and then the tokenizations come out. It's a little bit counterintuitive for a lot of people, because you think, oh, I want to first tokenize, and then I'm going to go and do my analysis on top of it. And one of the things that I like about this approach is that many segmentation and tokenization decisions are actually connected to part of speech tagging. So one good example is like if you have, katabathu or katibatu, right? So his writer or she corresponded with him. If you split the ha at the end, if you somehow know that the ha at the end, the pronoun, should be split, you still have to change the T to be a ta maftuha or ta marbuta, right? Depending on a particular interpretation that's related to the part of speech, the lemma, other things. So they're all really connected with each other, and instead of us having to, let's say in the Emira system, there are special layers after the segmentation that go and does rewriting, and then go another level, there's 2 levels of rewriting, and then you go to the part of speech tagging. But you could make mistakes, right? And instead here we kind of do it together, and we optimize for all of them together. Okay, let me just kind of show you the demo of this. So this is not exactly Meta, it's a system called Emira, which is actually Meta and Emira combined together. This is something we developed kind of about a year or so ago. It was finished. People who used Meta before, I'm really sorry. You suffered because people had, there was a prototype, academic prototype, you had to download it and download like 3 other packages from other places and install, and it was a pain. This is so much nicer. You just download, it's a one big Java file, and you can run it. In fact, if you go to this web page and you go to the link that says download MetaMira, you can even use it without SAMA. So SAMA, the standard Arabic morphological analyzer that used to be always a restriction, we have now a version that uses Aramorph, which is the free version, kind of older version of SAMA that has about 90% or so of coverage in terms of the forms of the lemmas, and of course no case endings. So you can actually use it for directly. It's free for research purposes, but we still claim that optimal behavior would be with SAMA, actually. So if you get SAMA, you have to get it from the LDC. We cannot give it to you. So here, if we just go to, let's say, Al Jazeera, just to make this, so you don't say I'm canning this. So I can pick anything, I don't know, this one good? Or should we just say, this is real time, just happened right there. It's much also for those who use Meta, this is like 15 times faster than Meta. So it's very nice. What you get is, for the demo purposes, just to kind of highlight what you're getting, the colors are just referring to the high level post-speech tags, like verbs are red, nominals are black, particles are blue, and proper nouns are in green. And you can see already all the nominal kind of spotting, the Quds, Israel, the Quds is right there for Jerusalem and Israel. And if you go over any of these forms, it gives you all of the different features associated with it. This is a noun, it's nominative, masculine, singular, it's in an idafa construct. So this is the head of an idafa, which in this case happens to also be correct. So it's Majlisul Amni, and it's council, you get the loss even correctly. Obviously you realize, because a lot of the data that we use was based on Newswire, I'm picking Al Jazeera. If you say, why don't you go and pick something from poetry or whatever, it's probably not going to behave as well. But so I acknowledge this, but even with that, it's actually doing quite well. Case endings in some cases are not going to be perfect, but we also, if you click on the dialectized forms, it gives you the full dialectization of this text. So if you're trying to read it, you can see it here, and then the list of lemmas are also there. So this is for people who are interested, let's say, just for doing lemma spotting or looking at similarity between texts. This would be the dimension of it. Okay, it's 3:40. It's time for the break. But if you have any questions or ask me during the break, I'll be happy to answer. Yes.
The dialectalization is on the basis of the first ranking analysis of each word?
The first ranking analysis, yes. The top choice according to the ranking that we do against our own classifier. That's correct. I think we did at one point some evaluations where we said, how well do I do if I look at the top 2 and the top 3? And obviously, we generally have a really nice kind of steep increase. So it's within the top 2 that you get like to 99%. So it's kind of nice to see that. But here it's just the top 1. So this should be, based on the numbers I showed, about 96% correct in terms of lemma choice and internal word dialectization, but about 16% of the time it may be wrong as far as the case ending. We probably can look for some here. I'm sure we will find some. Okay, it's break time.
For how long?
I think the break is 10 minutes, so till 4 o'clock. And then we have another hour and a half. Okay, so now we continue after the break. Thank you. to start by looking, so everything I discussed so far has been about morphology in the context of standard Arabic, and we didn't talk about morphology in the dialect. So there's some good news and there's some bad news when you go to dialectal morphology. So in terms of the good news is things have been simplified in some directions. So nouns, for example, nouns and verbs both have simplification in the paradigm. So where standard Arabic has case endings, the dialects predominantly just drop the case endings. Paradigm reduction, so things like the plural masculine and plural feminine are now just plural often. Typically it goes with the masculine more than the feminine. You also get similar behavior in the verbs. Things are just kind of more simplified. This is not surprising, and it's consistent with what happened, say in Romance languages vis-a-vis Latin, let's say, case disappeared. At the same time, other things became more complex, and in particular, Euclidic usage. So if you remember, we had a little graph like this earlier that says, here's what you would have inside of a verb morphology. When you go to Egyptian Arabic, this becomes more complex. So in addition to having a subject and an object morphemes, you also get indirect object added to it, and on top of that, you get a negation circumplitic. So it's a two-part the negation, kind of like the French ne pas, but it's actually part of the verbal morphology. As an example here, something like وَلَمَا كَتَبْتُ هَلُوش as a single word, it's a single utterance, and many people would write it as a single word, in fact. But the standard Arabic, there's nothing equivalent to it in terms of the morphological richness that's kind of packed inside of the word. Actually, the whole class of things that involve this kind of negation ends up being translated as, 2 or 3 different words in standard Arabic when you map them. Other things that we see happen are kind of a diversity in the form of some of the clitics, even when they exist in standard Arabic. So for example, the future marker, the sa particle clitic that appears in standard Arabic, if you look at the last column there on the right side, that exists in standard Arabic, but it actually didn't disappear, it just changed forms in different dialects. It's kind of interesting, that it was something that already existed in the standard Arabic, but it's just not being used. And instead it becomes hayiktib or hayiktub or hayiktib or rah yuktub or hayiktub, and you get these different forms of it, even though there is an existing standard Arabic one that could have been used. Some examples here of the collapse of some of the paradigms, and what's kind of interesting, if you point your attention to the boxes that are merged on the Levantine, Iraqi, and Moroccan. This is kind of an interesting thing that people who, from the eastern side of the Arab world who visit Morocco are confused about. What it is that whereas the standard Arabic you have first person, second person masculine, second person feminine, in Levantine the first person and the second masculine are pronounced the same way. You say katabt, ana katabt, anta katabt. But for women it's katabti. And in what happens in Moroccan Arabic is that ana katabt and you ktabti. And what happens is that men usually get confused. Why are they being referred to in the feminine form? Just find that funny. But these are kind of one of the slight things that are going on. There's a couple of other things. It's amusing, yes, perhaps.
Sure, you get both very
It could also be kind of misunderstanding. There are times when, even this ambiguity of the first and second person, I remember a few times where somebody's saying something and I cannot tell from their intonation if they're asking a question to me or they're making a statement about themselves. And I would ask, like, are you talking about me or you? I don't know, which one is it? And it's funny, they use it without the pronoun specification. They could have said ana katabt, but they don't just say katabt. Okay, I'm going to skip over this part with Najib just to, and jump to kind of, this is more recent work, just also to get us closer to finishing on time. When I talk about a particular tool that we developed at Columbia called Kalima Egyptian, ARZ is the international standards organization symbol to represent Egyptian Arabic. Don't ask, I don't know. So it's ARZ, and that was the term that the LDC used for a while, so we ended up sticking with it, being stuck with it. So Kalima ARZ or Kalima Egyptian is the same thing, actually. And what we did here is develop this morphological analyzer. This was done as part of the BOLD project in the US in the last couple of years. And we wanted to make it have the same look and feel and behavior as the Backwalter morphological analyzer, partly because we could have chosen to make a different set of conventions, different names for the speech tags, come up with a very different way of looking at the language. But we thought it would actually make more sense to be consistent with a standard that already exists for standard Arabic, despite some limitations of the standard that we know about. But this would allow us eventually to do adaptation, let's say using resources in the standard Arabic to help with the dialect, without having to worry about, on top of dealing with the different languages, to also align the different part of speech tag sets and different decisions. So we tried to be very conservative in the decisions that we made. And the work was done in a pretty short time, partly because of the existence of a wonderful resource called the Egyptian Colloquial Arabic Lexicon. This is an LDC developed resource. If you're interested in work on Egyptian Arabic or dialects, you should definitely know about it or play with it at some point. It was a very richly annotated data set, which we made, I mean, in my mind, full use of, almost full use of. This resource has about 66,000 inflected entries, so it's actually completely inflected forms that are represented using their own orthography that was not exactly the same as the code orthography, although kind of relatable. It was internally consistent at least, so we could apply some changes in a consistent way to it. But it was more focused on the phonology also. So you have a phonological representation and deep morphology. So the lemma plus sets of features, which are kind of like the functional kind of aspect of the morphological representation. And what we needed was something a bit more shallow that tells me that these are the sequence of the morphemes as is used in Backwalter, as I said earlier. So a big part of the effort was making sure to convert everything so that it's consistent with what we're using and extend, do paradigm extension, because we only had 66,000 examples basically of inflected forms, and we wanted to model the full language. And this was done with a combination of rules and learning from the data itself how to extend it. Some of the interesting things that I learned about Egyptian doing this, because I'm not an Egyptian native speaker, and I always thought I sounded stupid when I spoke in Egyptian. And when I started working on this, I realized exactly that I should sound stupid. In fact, I was applying Levantine-style pronunciation to a lot of things I wasn't even aware of. One of the funny things where this fact that you have the pronouns on the bottom that are the attached pronouns have different allomorphic forms, which kind of are uniquely Egyptian, and other dialects do not have the same kind of distinctions. So you say al-baha versus kitab, you have an extra A added in that case. And sometimes people confuse this, they think, oh, this is like a case ending. It's really not. It's part of the clitic, not part of the base word. And we try to model all of this in the same spirit of trying to create something that has the full diacritic so that it could be used later for other interesting things the same, like synthesis, let's say, for Egyptian. Other things we added, clitics and power speech tags that did not exist in the Call Home Egypt or in the Sama resource, or there were additions there that were made. And also we added support for the non-coda forms. So the idea here is that we developed a standard way of writing, but if nobody's writing in it, it's useless. So part of the interface of our tools included, by design, a way of being aware of the different ways that people write. So one example here I have is that the future marker in Egyptian has commonly two different forms. It's a ha or ha, right? And the Egyptians know exactly what I'm talking about. So it's hayiktib or hayiktib. And both of these you actually see you look at different texts in different groups. And I tried to ask lots of Egyptians, what is the preference? And nobody can give me a good answer for this. If you have an idea, let me know, maybe during the next break. But we allow to recognize both of these and map them to the same form, effectively normalizing them. And with the kind of extension that we did, the coverage that we got just using this resource with these set of rules that I described, and there's a publication on this from 2 years ago, we go from 66,000 entries, which you could have used just as a lookup, right? You get a word, you look it up, is it in the 66,000? Okay, here's the analysis. We go to 48 million, which I think is a kind of pretty nice extension of the work. So here's an example. If you had a word like, makitab til hash, you get possibly different analysis, but in the things that you would get would be the lemma, the coda spelling of the word, and then the split in terms of the Backwalter morphemes. If you drop the things that are Egyptian specific, this could be easily mapped to standard Arabic, right? Which is kind of nice. And you also get the glosses associated with it. In terms of the performance, from an analysis point of view, this is just the out-of-context coverage, right? Let's look just at, let's say, the token recall here. So token recall means that if you have a test set that has been manually analyzed, so that every word gets the right definition of the morphemes and the lemma, etc. And here we're looking just at the part of speech, just to simplify the task. You can ask the question, out of context, if I take this word and I ask a morphological analyzer, give me all the readings for this word, right? What is the likelihood that I could find? Well, how often do I find the correct answer among the set of choices? Not necessarily that I got the right answer, but that the answer is available among the set of answers. And when you use standard Arabic on the Egyptian data, you only get 67% or 68%. That means 1 of every 3 words in Egyptian gets no analysis or gets an analysis that is not a correct analysis. Think Maktabt al-Hash. If you give Maktabt al-Hash to a standard Arabic analyzer, you're going to get nothing back, right? There'll be a no analysis case. And all the cases that are like it, basically. Using the Egyptian system that we developed, the Kalima Egyptian, just the Egyptian part that I talked about, the one that has the 48 million forms, this number goes to 88.7 or 89% of the tokens. And then we also added to this the standard Arabic with forced extensions. What we did is we said every time I see sa in the dictionary, like the future particle, let's say, I'm going to make a duplicate of it that's ha and another duplicate of it that's ha. And I'm just going to basically make up a form of standard Arabic that has a lot of clitics that are Egyptian. It sounds ridiculous, but it gets me the part of speech tag that I actually need in about 4% of the time. So that's kind of an advantage in this case.
So, yeah, I mean, you don't find it in the set of the possible ones because it's empty, or it cannot be empty, instead you don't find it. I mean,
in both cases. That's a really good question. I was afraid somebody will ask because I don't have the numbers, right? Probably should be able. I think actually in the paper we list both the cases that were complete out of vocabulary, meaning you get 0 analysis back, as opposed to the cases where you get a set of analysis. And vague memory was that it wasn't that you don't get an answer. You often get answers, but they're not the right matching answers. Yeah, I remember actually in the highest performance, there was like less than 1% of the time that we get nothing back. But we still get, maybe like a 7% or so of cases where we don't know, we cannot match it. So yeah, so you get answers, but they're not the right answers. Now what we did with this tool, so I talked to you earlier about this tool Meta, right, that does the disambiguation. And we extended it to the Meta Egyptian or Meta ARZ. And the nice thing about doing this work is really one of those beautiful moments where you say, wow, I'm so glad I spent all that time designing this system in a way that is, maybe I'm kind of patting myself on the back, but we're very happy with the design that we did, because it really meant we did not have to go and modify much in the infrastructure, the framework of the system. All we had to do is plug in a different morphological analyzer, which was in the same database format, right? So the system just knew what to do with it, and also provide the training using the Pan-Arabic tree bank, using the Egyptian version of the tree bank, which was also created in the same by the same people with the same style format. So it was all kind of really, quite easy to do. Now, of course, this didn't happen in one afternoon, but it still could have taken a lot longer to develop. At that time when we did this work, Meta, I think, was about 8 years old since it was started, maybe 7 years old since it was started, 2005 to 2012, and we were able to do this in a couple of months, basically. So it was kind of nice when we had all the pieces come together. So some numbers on the behavior. In this table, at the top you see the system, and then the training data that was used for that system, and then the particular test set. So here we're using Meta MSA with MSA data tested on an MSA test set or an Egyptian test set. And the first column should look like the numbers that you saw earlier in the 3-colored set of things that I was showing you. The second column, the one on the right, is the performance on the Egyptian if you use the standard Arabic disambiguator. Now, remember, the numbers that I said about the analysis recall said 68% of the time the answer is somewhere there. That doesn't mean you're going to get the answer, right? So the 68 is really kind of the upper limit in your ability to get the full answer. And in fact, the numbers, when you look at all the feature, which for standard Arabic we do 84, that drops to 27, which is quite miserable. Some of these, of course, I will admit, had to do with case. So the system that standard Arabic is trying to predict that there are case ending to all the Egyptian nouns, which don't. So that kind of leads to these disagreements. But if you look at the lemmas, you still see actually that the effective case is gone and the performance there is still high. I mean, it gets higher, of course. Now, when we look at the meta Egyptian system, or the meta NRZ, and we compare using the Egyptian data from the LDC, which is significantly smaller than the standard Arabic data, we still get a very nice improvement across the board on all of these different metrics. So we go from 27 to 75 on the all, the lemmas go to 86. But still, things like tokenization going from 90 to 97. 97 sounds good, but this is, remember, like the first step for doing any future processing that you would do. The 3% error or so in segmentation is really major. Still, you don't want it. We tried combining the data from LSA and Egyptian, and it didn't really help much. But I think this was just kind of a simple experiment of just dumping all the data together. I think there's much more work that can be done to adapt. So I don't think this is the end of the story there. Okay. I'm going to skip over the slide, but just FYI, there's a version of Kelima that's for Iraqi also that was developed as well. I'm going to skip that, and it comes with a tokenizer. Skip that. Sorry, just I'm kind of watching the time, and when I get to talk like more interesting things, and all the information is there, and the links are there. And if you're interested in any of these tools that are listed anywhere in the tutorial, just email me. And I'll do my best to get it to you, or tell you how to get it, or help you getting it. Then MetaMira I mentioned earlier is the tool that combines the Meta and the Amira tools. With the demo that we showed online. Currently, the demo actually is just doing morphological disambiguation and tokenization. The base phrase trunking and the named entity recognition is work that we are doing, but is not public yet. Actually, this is something you may be interested in, the NER stuff, so we should probably talk about it. Because, yeah, I had asked a question about this one. But it should be available soon.
What do you mean soon?
Yeah, I mean, so I don't know.
So I'm interested in co-reference.
Okay.
I would need the named entities for this.
Yes. Why don't you email me, and I will forward it to the right people. Part of the problem is this. The base-based chunking and the name entity recognition were really mainstays of the Amira system that Diab has been developing with her students in George Washington. And I go on the meetings every week, and we discuss them, and I know they've internally tested the systems, and there were issues of plugging all the pieces together. My understanding is that we are at the point where we are ready to release, but they haven't released it yet. So I would love to say next week, but I cannot really promise this. But when I have 1, 2, at least people who are saying, Nizar, where is this NER tool? We'd really love to play with it, or even beta test it for you. I think that will encourage the other team members that will help me go and say, really, look, give it to them. Even if you're worried about some things, just give it to them. Okay, so I will do that. Just keep it. Okay. Let's see here. Yes. Just a comment. This is kind of a high-level comment about everything that I've talked about. There's also some questions during the break. So we talk about all these different representations, and some of you guys may think, are you doing it this way? Could have done it this way? Is this too much information for my purposes? That should never be a bad thing. Too much information is not bad because you can drop it. You can just delete the diacritics when you don't need them. You can collapse certain categories for your purposes. A lot of research in Arabic NLP is really about feature engineering, using all these rich features in different ways for whatever you're doing, regardless of the application that you have. And I'd be happy to kind of advise or tell you what I think, for whatever you need. But typically, if you don't need to listen to me, you get the system like a MetaMira, you get this large number of features, and you can just do your own experiments on optimizing for the subset of features that will work for you. I will point you, if you emailed me also 2 sets of papers where they built kind of second-level features that derive from these features. So one of them was asked about during the break, was the lemma without diacritics. We don't produce a lemma without diacritics, but you could just simply delete the diacritics. And we call this the lem. So it's the word lemma without the vowels. LMM, you know, this is a made-up word. And it seems to actually be a helpful feature in certain tasks like parsing, for example. So this, you know, it's really up to you. You don't have to use these features exactly as we produce them. They're just suggestions, you may think, you know, that are based on particular ways of thinking of modeling the linguistics of Arabic and Arabic morphology and orthography, and you can do whatever you want with them. You know, and you should feel free to explore that space. Just remember, you want things to be consistent internally within your system to get the optimal expected, you know, engineering behavior. So these slides here are just about the different ways that you can actually think of a word and what kind of features that you have. Another comment I would want to say about this is that, you know, some of the decisions where we get like 99%, you know, they are high, but they tend to be kind of easier kind of decisions, which you may not necessarily need something as complex to get similar or close behavior. You can do something in a simpler, let's say, regular expression-based work, for example. I mean, I'll actually show slides in the NP section about this later. But when you go toward deeper features, we say, I'm going to get the gender because the gender is really important for modeling X, Y, Z that I'm interested in. That's okay, but if your ability to get the right gender feature is not high, you know, then you are risking. You're adding kind of more risk into your model. I mean, I probably should have picked something other than gender. Gender is not so hard to do. But you know, some other feature that's really hard to get, you're risking more. So going deeper is always attractive because it allows us to think of more interesting models, you know, but it's really more a reflection of how we think about language, not how the machine is able to handle language. So you want to keep that in mind and not be surprised or disappointed when you spend a lot of time developing a really nice, beautiful system and then it doesn't do as well as you want it to, because in fact the input to it is not as good as you would expect it to be. And there are always ways of kind of ameliorating the situation and handling this ambiguity that's inherent in the language. Let's just, I'm going to skip this. These are links to works that exist. And I am going to talk about syntax. So first, actually, do you have any questions so far about any of the morphology stuff? Just stop me whenever you want. So in terms of syntax, first of all, I mean, you cannot really completely separate morphology from syntax. There are lots of things that are crossing it, thus, terms like morphosyntactic behavior, etc. And we see that the richness and the morphology of Arabic kind of crosses also into syntactic issues, like, for example, Arabic is a pro-drop language, so subjects are conjugated, so some of the information about syntax are actually in the morphology itself. And there are certain situations where things can be quite complicated. You know, if you have, let's say, verbs that are transitive that may have a subject and an object, but if you don't know the transitivity of it, there are different ways of interpreting the roles of what comes attached to it. Also, Arabic has kind of a complex agreement system. So on top of what I said earlier about this discrepancy between the fact that some words look feminine singular, but they are semantically masculine plural, like the Sahara case, it's kind of one aspect of things. This is something else. This is about the agreement that happens between nouns and other, let's say, adjectives or nouns and verbs. And then there's kind of another twist on things that has to do with having things called, let's say, irrationals. So nouns that happen to be non-human, to simplify, have different agreement behavior than nouns that happen to be human. And I'll show you an example later on of this. Obviously, case endings is a big thing that interacts between syntax and morphology. So that's something to be aware of too. And because of the way words are agglutinated, when you have all these clitics, like the preposition being attached to the word, etc., it means that at least in the work that's been done on Arabic parsing, there's an initial step of tokenization, where like prepositions, for example, are separated from the rest of the word. You can imagine, of course, a syntactic model of Arabic that ignores this fact and just has a different tree structure that works over complex part-of-speech tags and clusters of forms that's probably more complicated. The LDC luckily did not go that road and actually went with something that kind of was universally kind of more meaningful, I would say. Okay. Just a quick review of Arabic kind of syntactic phenomena. So typically you get, in discussions of Arabic grammar that there's two types of sentences, verbal sentences and copular sentences. Verbal sentences have verbs somewhere in them, typically at the beginning. So the verb followed by the subject followed by the object, and the copular sentences are just like a topic followed by a complement. And then in the verbal sentences, there is partial agreement. It only agrees in gender. So there's no number agreement in the verbal sentence structure. So it means you always get the verb in the singular, regardless of whether it's plural or singular subject that follows it. So it's كتب الولد, كتب الأولاد, you don't actually make a distinction. I'm actually going to skip over the rest of this slide here. And unfortunately, this leads sometimes to kind of an ambiguity in the structure that is common, where we can't really tell, is this verb, what is it agreeing with exactly with what comes after? So you may have more than one noun phrase, and you cannot tell from the agreement which one necessarily is the one that has to be the subject, just because sometimes also subjects and objects can be moved around. On top of this, it could also be that there is no explicit subject, it's just a pronoun, which then you cannot tell if you have a verb followed by a noun, is this really the subject or is it the object, and then the noun is the pronoun he or she, let's say. So these are things that we find actually are part of the errors that happen when you're doing Arabic parsing. Now the copular sentences are simply, as I said, a topic and a complement. Typically, the topic is definite and the complement is indefinite in terms of the definite article being attached. So you say the boy, poet, it's kind of consistent with like new information, old information type theories on discourse. But also there's a bunch of auxiliaries that can be used, like what's called lovingly Kana and her sisters, which is a funny name, but that's what they call them. So these are particles that come into the copular construction and typically add additional nuance to it. Since it's not tense, there's no verb there. Let's see. Now the copular sentences and the verbal sentences join forces, and they end up also creating complex sentences that come from different kind of complements. So you may have something as simple as, the boy is smart, the boy in the library, this is a copular sentence. But you can also have the boy, his book is big. And that's a copular modified by a copular. So the complement is a copular sentence that modifies the topic of the first copular sentence. And the complement could also in itself be a complete verbal sentence. So you get the analysis of the boys wrote the poems. It's really, although there's a verb, it's typically for people who are not Arabic speakers, they're saying, why isn't this a verbal sentence in the analysis? It's not considered verbal, it's considered a copular sentence where the complement is a verbal sentence. And this actually is needed to explain the difference in the behavior of the agreement. That in this particular order, you get full agreement between the subject, the semantic subject, not the syntactic subject here, that's the boys in this case. And also to explain the fact that the topic that appears before may actually not necessarily be the subject. So you can have the poem wrote them, the boys. So in this case, the first thing is actually not the subject, and it's just a topic followed by a complement that happens to be a verbal sentence. So this is nothing special. This is actually what is taught to kids, and some of it doesn't exist in the dialects. Actually, it's behaved differently in the dialects. Yeah.
Does this has a particular programmatic function?
Yes. A particular what?
A pragmatic function.
The choice between one or the other. I mean, yes, I would say that you can always kind of manipulate the way you present this. So the last one, instead of saying the poems, the children, the poems wrote them, the children, you could say the children wrote the poems, right? But probably most likely here you will want to highlight something about the poems.
Is it like it is the poems?
Yeah, exactly. You're topicalizing more.
Topicalization.
So it's highlighting that the topic is the poems. You give it more weight. Yes. Now, in terms of the structure of the nominal phrase, the noun phrase, you know, it's generally kind of simple. You know, you have a certain strict order that things apply. So you have the determiner followed by noun, adjectives come after, and then you have you know, post modifiers like prepositional phrases, etc. But then, as I mentioned earlier, there's this issue of the gender number agreement. For things that are rational or human, let's say for in Arabic, al-aql versus al-aql, that's the term that's used. The agreement is, if it's human, the agreement is completely matching in terms of member, gender, and definiteness. Also case, which I'm not showing here. So if you have a feminine singular writer, it gets a feminine singular adjective, let's say ambitious in this case. If it's plural, it's feminine plural. But what happens with non-persons or non-humans or irrationals, what they're called, is that the agreement is exceptional and it becomes the feminine singular always that's used. So let's say the word offices always gets, you know, in the plural, it always gets a singular, even though if it's plural in form, it gets an adjective that happens to be singular. So this is kind of another dimension that's separate from the fact that it could be morphologically a broken plural, or also has a discrepancy in the mapping between gender and number. There's likely three different ways that things can go against your expectation, right? The mapping of the feature to the most common morpheme, the fact that you would use a template or not, like a broken plural template or not, and also the agreement issue. And you know, a good model would want to address all of these things. There's a paper by Salah Buhlani, it was ACL maybe 3 years ago, where she actually produces statistics on all of these phenomena in the Pan-Arabic tree bank. So I mentioned earlier that we actually annotated all of the trees with the functional gender number information, and then we can do actually the statistics and test hypotheses, like how important is it to model rationality or not modeling it, right? And you can get the numbers from there. And it shows that the more complex model is much better at actually predicting the correct form than not. Okay. Now, another thing that's interesting actually, this is also Arabic and other Semitic languages have it. It's called an idafa construction. So this is a particular structure where you have two nouns followed one after the other with an encoded, like the relationship between them is encoded through the structure. So noun one of noun two, so to say the king of Jordan would be just King Jordan in this case. There's kind of more complex thing that happens that typically, you know, if noun 2 is definite, noun 1 becomes definite by the fact that it's in this particular construction. Also, if noun 2 is indefinite, noun 1 stays indefinite because of this construction, which kind of makes it even more complex. But what this means typically is that you can end up having these chains that can be long if you want, you know, like son, uncle, neighbor, chief, community manager of the company, you know, is how you would say the cousin of the CEO's neighbor. If you ever want to say such a thing, you know, I'm Japanese, maybe Spanish. But this is completely actually understood. I mean, there's like, it doesn't even hard to understand. It's just like, okay, yeah, that's what it means. Now, since I mentioned definiteness a couple of times here, just kind of a pointer about the importance of the definite article actually in syntax. So it's a morphological feature, but it interacts heavily with syntax. So if you take two nouns, let's say the word writer and the word artist, and you put them in different conditions, you know, the definite, indefinite, so you get the 4 combinations basically, you get 4 different constructions that are all valid, in fact, in this case. So you can have al-katib al-fannan, the artistic writer, or katib fannan as an artistic writer, or you have al-katib fannan, this is the one on the bottom, it's a copular sentence, the writer is an artist, or katib al-fannan, which means in this case it's indefinite followed by definite as the idafa construction, meaning the writer of the artist. So just switching around the definite article creates different syntactic structures and obviously different interpretations. This is very important. I'm going to skip over this. This is just kind of a summary of all the different kind of issues of agreement and adding to them one of my favorite complex things, that the way noun and number agreement in Arabic, which also is another degree of complexity where things flip between singular and plural and they change case. So to actually model, you know, what is the form of the word that I should print out with a particular number, you have multiple cases you have to consider. So I'm going to skip over that.
Nizar?
Yes.
Just one. Dumb question.
Sure.
Arab English is better.
It depends what you mean by it. Sana, do you have a concept for what would be a good single word translation for Arab?
For Arab,
Is it a combination?
I think we use parsing.
Yeah, but parsing, I mean, not syntactic.
Parsing,
Yeah.
it either means the internal syntactic structure or the full dialectization of the sentence.
Yeah.
Or maybe you can use constituency parsing or dependency parsing.
I mean, I mean, I mean, if you use Arab in the sense when you get like the first word you say, that actually is a combination of syntax and morphology specification. And then, saying what is the subject of what is the direct object of what.
That's a different.
So that would be the closest to this form. I've seen people just refer to Arab as determining the case ending only, which is kind of, but I like your definition better, that is a bit more inclusive. There isn't an exact single match. I know Case Dukes, who developed the Quran corpus, in his dissertation, he just defined the word with all its complexity and just used it in English. He refers to Arab throughout his work. But yeah, I mean, it's a bunch of things, basically, from our point of view. Okay, so now I thought everything I mentioned so far was about standard Arabic. If we go a little bit toward the dialects, we see some differences, as I mentioned, generally earlier. One of the things, for example, is that this issue of the order and the agreement differences that happen, that seems to have disappeared. So you could actually do Ulad Katab al-Ash'ar or Katab Ulad al-Ash'ar, and that's acceptable. Both of these are valid forms that you hear and you accept, even though the second one is considered inappropriate instead of Arabic. In the box on the slide over there is kind of interesting. So this was looking at statistics for standard Arabic versus Levantine from the Levantine Arabic tree bank. So there is actually a Levantine Arabic tree bank. I think it's about 40,000 words. It's not public. It was done at the LBC, and they have not released it outside the smaller community, basically. It was done as part of work on the Johns Hopkins workshop some 9 years ago. So what we did, we did some statistics because we came to the project at the time thinking, well, in standard Arabic, the majority of the verbal construction should be verb subject, right? Because it's verb is the verbal sentence is verb first, subject second. But when you look carefully, you find that, and this is Newswire text, right? That if you make a distinction between explicit subject and dropped subject, like the pronoun that's dropped, so the Dhabi cases, right? You find actually different numbers. So when the subject is explicit, we find 35% of the time it comes after, and 35% of the time it comes before. Which means from the point of view of an explicit subject, it's equally likely either way. And in about 30% of the time, there's just no pronoun. Now, of course, Arabic, Arab, to go back to that, typically would say that the case of the pro-drop or the subject, they actually say the verb is first, followed by the dropped, followed by the missing subject. But you could have imagined a different system that says, oh, the missing subject is before, not after. I mean, I'm complicating things. I'm not actually saying that's better. It's probably not. But it's how you're counting can be affected by what particular grammatical theory you have in mind. But the number was a bit surprising, But if you counted the way traditional grammar would count it, you would say that 65% is verb subject and 35 subject verb, which is consistent with the intuition. For the Levantine, the numbers are quite different. We find that 60%, that's a very large majority, happen to be without a pronoun. Now, this could be the effect of the particular corpus. The Levantine tree bank was based on telephone conversations in Jordanian Arabic specifically. So it's possible that a lot of the reason for this is because there was a lot of I said, you said, what about her, people gossiping and talking with each other. So maybe that's why things were dropped. I don't know. I mean, so that may be an effect of the particular corpus phenomenon. But if you ignore the cases of the pro-drop, you still see that the subject verb versus verb subject explicit cases now is 30 versus 10, so that's 3 times, which again is consistent with the intuition that the dialect happens to be a lot more subject-verb order than verb-sub. Okay, other things that we notice is this idafa construction that I mentioned. So in addition to the basic idafa form that exists in Standard Arabic, which continues to be used in the dialect, you also get another form where you have an exponent that connects to, so you can refer to, you know, imalik taba'atun or ibad taba'an bayt, etc. And of course that word taba in Levantine becomes bita or dial or mal, depending on the dialect that you're speaking, right? And so it's kind of highly variable. I actually also know that in Levantine there's yet another form where you could say things like, you know, babul al-bayt or shambitu al-ahd, right? That's this other kind of more complex construction that could be found there. I'm going to skip over the Tabaruda thing, although it's really a fun discussion, but we will not have time. You can ask me about it later. Also things like, for example, the use of the demonstrative particles, which are quite common. There's certain preferences for whether they appear before or after or both ways. In Levantine, there's a clitic that could be actually a simplified form. So you can say things like el-bayt as opposed to had-el-bayt or el-bayt-da, for example. So these are things that also are extending beyond what exists. Negation, we mentioned earlier that there's this certain clitic negation that exists with the mash, but also common you find in several dialects like a particle bish, which just means pure negation, as opposed to the particles that exist in Standard Arabic, some of which are connected to a particular tense. So len means negation in the past, len means negation in the future. So there you have tense and negation connected with each other, whereas these dialects, mish is just negation, more like man in sense. Okay. I'm going to skip over this and skip over, these are different. So just two pointers to resources. Pan-Arabic Tree Bank, most important resource for people working on Standard Arabic. Any kind of syntax, this is the resource that people go to. So it's a very large number of words. I think this is like the largest single tree bank that was developed by one entity. Let's see. There is, of course, the Prague Arabic Dependency Tree Bank. And unlike the Penn Tree Bank, which is a constituency representation, the Prague Dependency Tree Bank is a dependency representation that's the richest in terms of the depth that it goes into modeling. So it includes like semantic models as part of the tree representations. Unfortunately, it's not as large as the Penn Arabic Tree Bank, and it was, you know, done a long while ago and annotated or checked for annotation with a small number of annotators. And has not been continued. Then there's the Columbia Arabic Tree Bank, and this is work that I did at Columbia, which is kind of going in another direction. It's like the anti-richness, so going extremely as poor as we can, but yet we believe we can recreate it, and we actually were able to show that we can add the morphological features afterwards. So this is a tree bank of a morphologically rich language that only has 6 part-of-speech tags, as opposed to 500 in the Pan-Arabic tree bank, for example. But there's a few interesting papers about it I would recommend it if you're interested in the question of, you know, annotation questions for morphologically rich languages, the cost of developing something new, you know, how much would it cost to create something. We went here for cheap but quite good, let's say. Like, cheap but okay. So maybe in terms of completeness, it's not as rich as the other cases, of course. But then, you know, there's always a trade-off. This was actually here, there's an animation which you cannot see at all because of the colors, so I'm gonna, it's irrelevant. The point of this was, if you get the slides from me, you may be able to see them. I can, just highlighting the issue about what is a constituency and a dependency. Probably this is not the forum to explain this completely, but these are just different representations that have some advantages in one case or the other, and you can really have the fullness of the information in both sides. You can always, you know, there's not that one is less than the other, just a different way of representing information. Okay, just skip. Finally, there is also the Quranic Arabic corpus, which is a syntactic tree bank of the Holy Quran. And this was the work by case students that I mentioned earlier. Very nice interfaces. This was taking actually, I mean, so the Quran happened to have been already its Arab, or this parsing, this syntactic details of it, have been done a long time ago and recorded in large volumes of text. And what this group did at Leeds University was to actually map it, bring it into the digital age. So the annotators, interestingly, were not actually doing syntactic annotation in the same sense that syntactic annotation was done in the tree banks from Penn. They were mapping the Arab, this other concept of parsing representation, into the one that's used here. And he tried to be as close as possible to the representation. So I think it's a really interesting work, actually. And in terms of its formalism, it's a hybrid dependency constituency. And Kais, as part of his dissertation work, he actually developed a special parser that is able to do the hybrid parsing that is needed for this representation. Let's skip over prop bank, computational resources. So, trying to make a decision about time here and what to, I think we can do this. Okay. So, this is a discussion of particular work that's done by Yuval Martin, Owen Rambo, and myself at Columbia. Exploring. So this is kind of a more practical question of when you parse. What question is? You have all these features. What is good to use? What's not good to use? What's important? What's less important? So what we wanted to do is explore the space of how the richness of the morphology helps or hurts. I say helps, you expect, because it's giving you specifics about agreement, etc., but hurts because it's hard to get it. So if you make a mistake, you're lost, right? So it kind of cuts both ways, particularly because of the way Arabic is done. There was kind of an analogy that we do in the paper between Czech and Arabic. So Czech has rich morphology with a complex case system, but it's not ambiguous as Arabic is. So when you see a case marker in Czech, you can trust it for what it is. But in Arabic, you don't have the case marker, so you're kind of guessing. So then the question of, does case help parsing? It does only when you can get it correctly, right? If you don't get it correctly, it doesn't help you, it may hurt. So this is kind of the rich morphology principle helps, but it's hard to get it, and it increases sparsity of the data because you have lots of different forms. So the question is, also of course in the case of Arabic, there's this discrepancy of form and function that just adds to the complexity of things. So what we wanted to do is explore, the space of possible features and how can they be used. This is a CL, Computational Linguistic Journal article, so it's kind of long. I'll be summarizing it here. So we looked at different part-of-speech tag sets, different ways of looking at them, different degrees of granularity, the value of different inflectional features, different combinations of features, the issue of do you evaluate using gold or predicted. Gold evaluations are nice, but they're not real, right? Because when you get a new sentence, you're not going to have a gold part-of-speech tag and gold features for that sentence. So the real practical test will be how well does it do when all these features are predicted. And also we looked at this question of form versus function-based values. Let's see. So so in this set, when you just look at the question of part-of-speech tags, and we looked at this series of about 6 or so different tag sets with different sizes, going from a tag set of size 6 to one that has 430, right? And you look at the different the performance here. I believe these are based on gold part-of-speech tags. So everything is gold. We train and then we evaluate. And the metric that we're using is the labeled attachment. It's a dependency. So you're saying for all the words in my sentence, what percentage of the time do I get the correct parent and the correct relation? So like a particular subject would say, I am the subject of this particular verb. That would count as good, otherwise it's bad. And here in this setup, the best performer happens to be the Bach-Walter tag set, which is the richest among the sets that we looked at, right? Getting an 84%. However, when you go to do predicted evaluation, the tag set that is the richest is also the hardest to predict. The numbers just basically tank, and you go down to about 72% from 84. Whereas in a much simpler representation like this extended cat that it's called, it's the 6 with deterministic extensions that are always guaranteed, you actually you drop, but you drop much less. So you drop 2 points 2.7 as opposed to 11 points. But the system obviously is not benefiting from these features. Okay, so now let's see. We then looked at different features, starting with the baseline that did not have any features added, and then we started adding different features, and we compare using all the features to specifically adding one feature at a time, and look at the value of them being added. And here we get that, you know, having a case, if you have to pick one single feature and you're using all features, case is the best feature that you want to add. But in terms of prediction, this is again reaffirming the story. Case is not a good feature because we don't predict it very well. And it's a chicken and egg story. You know, if meta has innate knowledge of whatever is equivalent to morphological disambiguation, is aware of syntax, it can predict features well, but features in such a case are needed to predict good syntax, so you have a problem, basically. And instead, actually, the determiner, which is the one I spent a lot of time talking about, this Aleph Lam and all of its coordination, is actually nicely shows that it's actually a good feature to use. It helps. And then when we look at combinations, the same kind of story happen, and we find that the case and state help in the goal, but they don't when you are looking at predicted states. However, the best features seem to be the determiner, the person, the number, and the gender. These are the features that are the most helpful for doing this person. So basically, the short story, if you're parsing, make sure you have your determiner, number, person, and gender. That's really what you need to use the short story. Okay. There is some, I'm going to actually skip over a bunch of slides to kind of get to a different topic in the translation, because this is supposed to run for another half hour, actually for 5:30, the way it was working out. There was work that was done on Arabic dialect parsing a while back.
I'm taking off.
Yeah, take care. So there's work that was done on Arabic dialect parsing a few years ago, and really it's not really been picked up. I think it's interesting work that probably should be picked up now that we have more resources. So there's a lot of interesting things to explore, but I'm not going to go through the discussion of the previous work. Okay. So the next topic that I wanted to just kind of give a sense of, and I think we didn't have this slide earlier, but just looking at another aspect altogether, which is the aspect of lexical variation between the standard Arabic and the dialect, and the consequences that this causes for doing natural language processing of it. So there's a lot of, and this is kind of not talking about morphology anymore. This is kind of saying, if you have a way of ignoring the morphology and you're just looking at, a lexical variation, what kind of variation do you see? And it's important to point out, of course, the interaction between the words, how they're pronounced and how they're written. So, for example, the cases that I marked in red, like the word Paule and Paule, Qitta, Qatta, and Qatta, if you write them in the same way, you don't actually see the distinction. So the writing system in this case is hiding some of these differences, which is fine, but there's no way to get a word like Wissa or Mazuna and force it to look like Qatta. You'd be kind of kidding yourself if you think this is the same word. It's not. Of course, slide of funny things. This is kind of the cocktail party version of like, aren't Arabic dialects kind of funny? That there are lots of words that are problematic. Words that are very safe in one dialect can be very bad in another dialect. You don't want to ever use the word mara in Egypt, even though it's a very nice word to refer to a female person in other dialects, but it's a bad word to refer to in Egypt. Just a coincidence of history of some sort. There are lots of other these cases, including things like the word Belash, which could mean start in Levantine but end in Sudanese. Right, so it's exactly the opposite meaning in this case. Lots of foreign borrowings that we find also. This is and they come from all kind of origins. Some have made it to be like completely part of the language, other less so. So, there's this kind of question that comes up when you're working with dialects and standard Arabic, is there dictionaries that relate to it? And unfortunately, actually, there's no dictionaries that are creative of dialect to MSA. You find sometimes in the Arab world collections of smart booklets that say, these are interesting words in the dialect, and here's how you would say them in the standard Arabic, but they're not really designed, I mean, first of all, they're not machine readable in the same sense that you would want a machine readable dictionary, and they're not necessarily lexicographically, optimized for computational purposes. So one of the things that we have worked on is developing such resources. Yes?
I was going to say, one thing to be aware of is that the new set of dictionaries that's being put out by LDC from the old Georgetown dictionaries,
yes,
it's not exactly a dialect to modern standard, but the decision was made to keep two orthographies, have the phonetic orthography, which reflects the way in which people actually pronounce words, but for the Arabic orthography, it tries to reflect the origin of words.
Which is a very similar principle to the coda spelling, basically. So that's one of those things where it's actually consistent with coda spelling. But of course, there are limits to how far you can go, because there are lots of things that have nothing etymologically relatable. So you're right that for some cases, it will allow you to link things, but it doesn't guarantee full linking, right? I mean, as far as I know, the only resource that actually explicitly focuses on linking dialect with MSA is the work that's done by Diab in the Thurwa dictionary that actually specifically is looking at this Egyptian word is linked to this standard Arabic word, linked to this English word. And a version of this was much earlier developed by actually me and Alan Rambo, like a few years earlier, but on a smaller scale for limited team. And I mean, when I basically took all of these existing pieces and putting them together. I'm going to skip over this. This is Thurwa here, and the Thurwa resource, which really we developed at Columbia. It's being continued at George Washington. And in addition to linking the forms, she actually specifies also coda and non-coda spellings that are common for the dialectal words to make it more usable, for computational purposes. I'm going to skip over DIRA. It's an online demo. Going back to just kind of the lexical reality of Arabic data. When we talked earlier about that there is dialectal Arabic and there is standard Arabic, but in fact, in usage, you find all kind of mixing that's going on. So Newswire, in like an example like the one I was demoing earlier for Meta, it's kind of nice, it's all standard Arabic, but in fact in broadcast news you find things like عشان كده هي بتتفاعل مع ما يحدث, what I mean? So you're switching from dialectal pronunciation to standard Arabic, and the بتتفاعل obviously has a particle at the beginning that is not standard Arabic, and to be able to handle this would fail. The system most likely would think that this is it's an unknown word, or it would be like a nominal reading. I think the ba is a preposition, for example, right? So which is not a good thing. And then you also get, of course, things like conversational speech text, conversational text of conversations. I'm really trouble speaking here, which is also mostly dialectal. And just kind of an example of code switching. This is from Al Jazeera with a Lebanese politician. And when we did this annotation, we actually listened to exactly how this person was pronouncing the word. So if he said a word like Nizam for Nizam, I counted that as being dialectal pronunciation in this case. It's not the standard Arabic pronunciation, which you could have chosen to pronounce. And if you do this, which kind of is a kind of a strict dialectal pronunciation, perhaps, you get all of these areas in red, which he jumps between the standard Arabic and his dialect. However, if you look at this transcript from the point of view of text processing, a lot of the words that I'm marking here in blue are words that, although they were pronounced in the dialect when they were written in a way that hides the dialectness of the word. So they did not write Nizam and Nizain, they wrote it with the Da, right? So making it consistent with kind of what Violetta was talking about earlier too. And from this point of view, it's interesting because it says, some of these decisions are kind of not as important. It's actually, this is a particular genre, of course, where the person is being taped on the news, he's speaking, so even his lexical choices are more formal. But there is one interesting thing in this context. I don't know where to find this word. There was a case where there was a word where actually, when the transcript was made in Al Jazeera, they changed what he said. They did not write exactly what he said, and it was something like "taykum," so "hatta yakum," so that there will be, and they changed it to "kay yakum." So they actually just translated the word into the standard instead of actually reflecting what he pronounced. So that also would mean that there's kind of a tendency, even when you're making the transcript, to clean up things even more. So you cannot trust it completely as a measure of the document. Just an example of code switching that we find between also Arabic and English, just like the NLP stuff that we talked about earlier. Is that you? Just actually gonna skip the rest of this section and go to machine translation, just at a high level, and then we have another 20 minutes. If you have any questions, please raise your hand. So we've talked about a lot of phenomena, orthography, morphology, syntax. And now we say, particular application is machine translation. What does this really mean? And one of the things that the first obvious thing that people tried was to look at the issue of the morphological complexity. So when you have very rich, complex forms, remember the numbers that I showed earlier that had the number of types in Arabic was twice as many as the number of types in English, right? Which means a lot of information is packed in the words. The kind of obvious idea that lots of people tried was to segment the words or tokenize them to reduce the sparsity. So this work by Habash and Diab a few years ago kind of compared the performance of different tokenization schemes with different sizes of data. And these scheme names are the same as the one that I mentioned earlier. So in the set of experiments that we've done here, it shows that if you do something like a tree bank tokenization or what's called second degree digitization, you end up doing the best performance. What this means is that you end up splitting the conjunction, the preposition at the beginning of the word, but you keep the pronoun at the end, the pronominal thing. That seems to actually work somehow best. I suspect that this was an effect of the data and the particular technique that we use. It was phrase-based statistical machine translation. There is evidence from other groups of people who tried different kind of techniques that different schemes actually do better. Typically going more in detail, like doing the D3, which separates all of the clinics. I take the lesson to be that, when you're working on a particular set of experiments where that could be sensitive to tokenization, that could interact in so many ways with language models, for example, that you're using, or the size of the window that you're looking at. If you say, I'm looking at a window of 5 tokens, and you change what is a token, you're changing what you're looking at. And it's hard to compare across different systems. Just maybe consider the possibility of comparing different tokenizations, right? And just say, optimize for the tokenization. And this is kind of another selling point of the setup of Medamira that we developed, is that we can just very easily just give you all of the different tokenizations that you want, in one step, and then you can just play with them and figure out what would work the best. These are just examples of these different kind of tokenizations more concretely, so when you're looking at this paper, you can actually see what you mean. Let's see. This. And then, so just kind of going back to the use of the Meda or Medamira system has actually become quite popular. We're very proud to say that in the NIST and key evaluation, the last one that happened a year or 2 years ago or so, 9 out of the 12 participants used our system to do the pre-processing. So, there's a lot of people who are using it. We do encourage you to use it, and please let us know if you have any questions about it. We're interested in feedback, actually, to do this. Now, a lot of the work that was done kind of on translation involving Arabic happens to be Arabic toward English, and the minority of work is going in the other direction from English to Arabic. And there are different things that you have to think about when you do this, right? So when you're going from Arabic to English, we know that tokenization and doing different kind of normalization happen. Lots of people have published on this. But when you go from English to Arabic, your goal, you would expect to produce Arabic that is, well-written Arabic. You cannot produce Arabic that has all the tokens separated. So it's not as simple as just saying, I'm just going to flip my models. You have to do additional steps of de-tokenization. And there's several publications that I'm citing there that actually looked at also the question of what is the right scheme to use in that direction, and how do you actually enforce a particular form. So when we're translating, we want the output to actually have the correct translation, let's say, and the correct alif, maksura, ya forms, which a lot of people, when they build these models, they just normalize, they just ignore those distinctions. So there's been lots of work that's done on doing this. I usually compare this to, there's no case in Arabic, but this is like the closest to true casing. So you can build a model where there is no alif hamza distinction, but at the end you just produce the alif hamza as a separate step. And in particular, at least the work that was done by Khuli and Habash, this is my student, we have the system. If you want to use it, you can make it available to you to do the de-tokenization work. So just email me about it. So here are some of the results that this student Ahmed Khuli worked on between English and going from English to Arabic. The best result that he got was using the Arabic tree name tokenization, just quite similar to the tokenization that was also optimal in the case of English. So it's turns out to be not as interesting. The optimal tokenization from the phrase-based point of view is kind of about the same, but then you still have to do this de-tokenization step. And even as we increase the size of the data, there still is evidence that this is actually helpful. So that's kind of good. Let's see. And actually skip over this tool called Remove, which does all kind of things to fill in gaps. And I'm going to get to the end actually with a discussion of Arabic dialect machine translation. This is the last part. So when there's been, in the last couple of years, a lot of interest in doing translation from the dialect to standard Arabic, particularly Egyptian to English under the BOLD program. But also, there's been some effort for a while. You can imagine this all connected to politics and wars and whatever that's going on. So Iraqi English speech-to-speech, for example, there was a program that went on for a few years in the US working on that problem. But the main issue really is that we don't have a lot of parallel data that we can use between the dialect and English or between dialect and standard Arabic. So to give just a kind of motivating example for why this is interesting to work on, if you try a sentence like the one we have here, there isn't electricity, what happened in standard Arabic, in Egyptian, Levantine, and Iraqi, and you run it through Google Translate. The standard Arabic, even though, the fact that Google Translate is trained mostly on news data and data from things that people have already translated, you need parallel data to do good statistical. So I was saying that when you use Google Translate to do this kind of translation, the standard Arabic version looks decent. It's not completely fluent on the English side, but it's decent. The dialectal versions are just terrible. You really lose a lot of information, or you get very bizarre translations. And that's primarily really connected to the limitation of resources, that there are very small, and actually for a long time didn't exist any dialect English corpora. And you have to kind of remember, why do parallel corpora exist? They typically, in the case of news, they exist because people are interested in reading about a particular event, or in different languages, or books are translated. But most of what's written as news or as books, as literature in Arabic, happens to be in standard Arabic, not in the dialect. That's why you don't get these naturally existing parallel data. They have to be kind of created in an unnatural way, kind of specifically being organic. And then this is beside all the other issues, the non-standard orthography, the morphology complexity, etc. So people try different kind of solutions that range from developing. This is like work Reza et al. Actually work was one of the early segmentation work in Iraqi Arabic before we developed any morphology tools, to kind of more complex, supervision of different kind of segmentations, etc. And then the last two ideas are kind of the two kind of major ideas that people think of as the right way to go. And this is kind of was a debate actually in the field. So in one direction, people said, the best way is to pivot on standard Arabic. So when you have lots of standard Arabic English data, you translate the dialect to standard Arabic, and then you use another system to do standard Arabic to English. And in principle, that sounds reasonable. One detailed problem is that they're usually in very different genres, and they talk about very different things. So you're not necessarily going to win, because that could be actually something that would hurt you. Now, that doesn't say that it's not going to help at all, but it's not going to solve the problem completely, unfortunately. And we didn't know this necessarily. We're kind of going into it. We're aware of it, but we did not know what exactly would be the measure. And then the other direction was kind of the more kind of engineering-based, maybe boring but robust solution, which was to just treat the dialect like another language and just generate lots of data. And the main question that people in that camp got was, but that costs a lot of money to translate data. To translate in general, to create power corpora, the usually estimated budget rate is that you pay 25 cents per word. So every 4 words is $1. That's a lot of money if you want to create a large size corpus that you can use for doing your own data. So the solution that was described in the paper by Diab from 2012 was to make things cheaper by using crowdsourcing. And they described a very nice set of experiments where they, annotated lots of data for very cheap, I think like $43,000, which is, not cheap, but still they made with it a lot more than they could have done, using crowdsourcing ideas. And they primarily pointed out the value of modeling a particular genre well. But this kind of approach is basically saying it's really not that interesting that there is a relationship between the dialect and the standard Arabic. This is just another language, so we just create more data for it, and we use standard techniques, which is in itself interesting as a solution to know that this would be a good solution. I personally think that probably it would be good to combine the two together. This work has not happened yet. My student who is interested is working on this. It's called disambiguation. But I'll talk to you about specifically the work that was done on doing pivoting. So these were experiments that kind of tested this question of how well would we do if we were doing a standard Arabic, so going from the dialect to standard Arabic and then using standard Arabic to English resources. And the system that he developed is called LISA. It's a rule-based approach that depends on the presence of a dialectal morphological analyzer. When Saloon actually developed a version, like a simple morphological analyzer called Adam, before any of the work that was done in Kelima, but it was it kind of survives in Kelima in terms of these specific extensions that I mentioned. When I said there was a Sana with some extensions, all of the extensions were actually part of this Adam work, in fact. And he had basically rules to transfer between dialectal analyses and standard Arabic analysis. And I'll show an example in a second. As part of the work that was done, maybe I should show you the example and come back to this result. This probably is a better order. So as an example, if you get a word, and you worked on Levantine in this example, you get a word like including non-standard orthography that's being used that's not consistent with the coded decision that he made. The tool that he developed, the Adam tool, the morphological analyzer, is able to give him the set of proclitics and enclitics, lemmas, and the features. And he tells him, this word has the following set of features in it. There's a wa, there's a ma, a future particle, and it has these enclitics, the preposition, and the pronoun. And what he did is he devised manually rote rules, like a transfer rules, that map from these dialectal forms into the standard Arabic. And the rules were things like what I'm showing you here, that says, if I see the man negation, or I see a negation feature and I see a future feature, right, I'm going to map it to the particle len. And at the same time, I'm going to change, something about this in the verb. In this case, he doesn't. It would be just mapping the future and the negation to one particle. And then same thing for those enclitics. Enclitics, I will map them into a preposition and a pronoun. And that's how you'd be able to get from ما يكتبوا to ولن يكتبوا له. Now, what he had done as part of this interface, he actually allows to look at the top one choice using language modeling. So we have lots of standard Arabic data, so we can do robust language modeling on the Arabic side, standard Arabic output. But it also allows you to look at the, let's say, the top and best list, or actually even a sausage ladder, so the confusion network of the translations. And then this then can be used together with statistical machine translation that expects standard Arabic to translate to English. What that means is that he doesn't have to actually get the translation from the dialect to standard Arabic perfectly. He could generate multiple possible translations, and then all of them are passed as part of a confusion network input into a translation system. And then let the translation from standard Arabic to English kind of disambiguate and help him in disambiguation. So it's kind of not the standard way that people think of pivoting exactly, but this is kind of a particular case where part of the pivoting system is rule-based, it's kind of fuzzy output, and then it's a reasonable thing. And doing this, he was able to get small but strong, statistically significant improvements going from a baseline, using the LSE system, so he gets about 0.6 blue points. So I mean, it was kind of disappointing for the effort. There was a lot more effort went into it. And at this point, he's exploring directions where he can combine this with using more data, which I think will benefit us more. This example is kind of his example that highlights all kind of phenomena. This is it's quite a constructed example that kind of highlights, the optimal case of his system being used. So the dialectal Arabic sentence with the English translation, and if you run it in Google Translate, you get all of these, unacceptable failures. But when he translates using Alyssa and then runs it through Google Translate, again, so this is run through Google Translate in both cases, you can see a much better quality output. Okay, and then, there's a few references that I linked in the slides that you have, and as I said earlier, if you want the PowerPoint, I probably should give the PowerPoint, I'll give you the PDFs, unless you want the PowerPoint for teaching, then please contact me about it, I should be able to provide to you. And then I'm just going to do another little advertising. So this is pictures from the new campus of my new home in New York University, Abu Dhabi, and we are hiring, we're looking for people. If any of the stuff that we talked about today is interesting to you and you would like to talk to me about, I would love to talk to you about coming to university. We're starting a new lab called CAMEL Lab, which stands for Computational Approaches for Modern Language. And a lot of the work there will continue about the themes that I discussed here. So core natural language processing for Arabic, standard Arabic, but also dialectal modeling, more work on machine translation, and also looking at directions of pedagogical applications. And we're looking for good men and women who can be research assistants, postdocs, or even research scientists. So send me an email and talk to me, catch me, I'll be happy to talk to you. Thank you so much. You're all probably very tired, but if you have any questions.
One thing maybe, this is a suggestion, so one thing you may add in your next tutorial maybe is semantic resources and annotation, like for bank,
So technically, there was one poor slide on prop bank, which I skipped over. It's actually in the slides. There's also, I would add, all the work that's kind of more and more of that's on sentiment analysis and sentiment analysis lexicons, which also is, we would fall within the semantic modeling too. And also there's work, of course, on semantic role labeling also that's using the prop bank, of course. Yes. And in my book, Introduction to Arabic NLP, I do have a chapter on that discusses the prop bank, the Arabic coordinate, and the semantic analysis. Hopefully we'll be updated to add more sentiment analysis.
You didn't talk about RBC?
Oh, I did.
Oh, you did?
I did in the earlier part of the talk. So we had a tool called Arabic, and I looked into a couple of publications about it. I mean, I discussed so I mean, this was one of, I mean, there was a discussion of the Arabic phenomenon itself, and a bit of history about this question of how to write Arabic using, you know, Latin script or Roman script. I'm not sure, I mean, I don't remember if, I also even showed a demo, I believe, of the Arab system, which, you know, so this is kind of some of the systems that we have. This demo is kind of funny, actually. When you test it, be prepared to be disappointed. if you put something in that you think, this should be a good Arabic sentence, why is it happening? This was trained on Egyptian Arabic, so it actually has to be written, you know, so for example, if you wrote, instead of saying Ragil, you wrote Rajul, or Rajal, for example, it actually will not know what to do. So this was kind of built from Arabic data. It used about 300,000 words of SMS and chat in Arabic, Egyptian Arabic mapped to Arabic script. So it's optimized for Egyptian. And it also in the output, as you see, does foreign word detection. So it tells you if, like the word good in that context is likely to be an English word. So in the mapping to Arabic script, it maps it as the word good, instead of writing Jim around there.
But for this demonstration, you're not using machine translation, right?
No. So that's a very good question. We're using, I mean, we're technically doing machine transliteration, which you know, is a variant on machine translation. If I can just summarize quickly what the technique is, we learn character level mapping between Arabic and Arabic script. And so we translate at the character level and then look at a space of combinations and use language models. I mean, this is kind of the basic components. You have the equivalent of a translation model, which can be a phrase table or a character level transliteration, and then a language model, right? The standard stuff. But in addition, we actually use the morphological analyzer Kelima to force the output to also look in coda. So the output here is not just Arabic script, it's Arabic script in the coda orthography. So we're trying to be completely consistent within our tools also. So that kind of filtering step is not part of a standard MT process, if you may. And it does help. We do show through published results that using the filtering actually improves the quality of the output. You can call it machine translation. We're testing using Moses, you know, the very commonly used tool for doing statistical machine translation, to actually do this work. And it's not as simple as it seems, partly because in this demo we're hiding a lot of messiness that you do not see. Just to give you an example, in the annotation that we're done, so actually in this case, actually, if you see the word from the end, it says "ashufak ba'd al-fitar," right? So il is separate from fitar, il is the definite article, but in the output we actually merge the two together. And there's certain, whereas also the last word there, ISA, is translated as 3 words, inshallah. And the design of the data that the LDC created, I mean, we helped them a little bit, but the design of the data was done so that the number of tokens between the Arabic and the Arabic is preserved, and that meant generating kind of partial forms of words. It would say, oh, il maps to alif lam plus, meaning always attachment to what comes after. And that's, when you use that kind of data, when you're doing the statistical MT, you have to do additional kind of processing, or you have to kind of, it adds another level of complexity to it. So we're actually testing to see if we can improve the quality of the models. One place where the quality could improve is because statistical MT, models phrases, beyond also the character level support that Moses does now for doing transliteration, using its native transliteration model. You can also look at the phrases, and currently we're not, actually. In this model that we have, the words is basically the phrase size. the transliteration of the characters is aware of the area around the word, and within the word, and that's it. And then the language modeling is just used to select on the target. So that's kind of a deficiency I would argue that could be improved. So that's kind of the short story where we are.
How does the Arabic part of onto-nodes relate to the resources you talk about?
Yeah, so I think, as I understand, the Arabic, the onto-nodes is built on top of the Pan-Arabic tree bank resources. So anything that had to do with the Pen tree bank or the prop bank would be basically part of it. I'm not sure actually, I'll be very, ignorant about what else is in onto-nodes beyond the Pen tree bank and the prop bank. Do you know which do you actually?
I'm particularly concerned about co-reference.
Okay, very good
as well. But
I
don't know about the quality of the.
Yeah, but the co-reference information actually should be present in the Pan-Arabic tree bank original annotations. They do make sure that all the pronouns are linked up. There's additional dash numbers that link them together, as far as I know. This is something I've not worked on, so I'll be very honest. I cannot give you any answers from good experience. But if you have any questions, I'll be very happy to look at it. It'll be an opportunity for me to learn about it. So just send me an email. It's 5, 20, 30. So I think this is the last minute of the NLP. Thank you, everybody. As I said, feel free to send me emails, ask questions.